We have a very busy and important agenda today. We're going to begin with our safety and review, a safety and security review, and that is going to be kicked off by Mr. Scott Braybrand, followed by our colleagues Marty Smith and Jeff Plattenberg. I would like to mention that in the audience we have some of our friends from Fairfax City. Welcome, Mitch and Diego. It's good to have you with us. So, Scott, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. McElveen. It's a pleasure and an honor to come to you all today for this work session and talk about our safety and security review. I want to reiterate to the school board and to the community that FCPS schools are safe places. We have had a very tough year of tragic events around the nation, and I asked my staff to review our current practices in the spirit of continuous improvement, and you will see recommendations today that we believe are necessary and will help enhance our safety and security in our schools. They're going to focus on three key areas of training, physical security, and mental health. And I'm going to let these folks get into the details of those, but we believe with enhanced training, with enhanced physical security, and with enhanced mental health supports in our schools, we will have safer schools in Fairfax County. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Smith and let him give additional introductions.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Not quite afternoon yet. So as Dr. Braybrand said, we're coming to you today with our comprehensive review of safety and security in Fairfax County. Mr. Plattenberg and Mr. Vaccarella have done excellent work to describe to you some of the safety and security guidelines that we follow in Fairfax County, and also bring in some recommendations so that we can enhance those systems and increase that secure environment for our students and staff. And so we have Mr. Plattenberg, who's going to present the work today. We have Mr. Vaccarello here, who is going to be support. And we really do need to thank these folks here, the folks within the Office of Safety and Security. And then we had consultancy from our Office of Research and Strategic Improvement, and then support from Julie Fowler, who is in my office. And so all of those folks came together to provide the report that we have today, and we look forward to an engaging discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. What I'd like to do is also like to recognize Lieutenant LaBarca and Lieutenant Ruck, two of the Fairfax County Police Department SRO commanders that are stationed right here in Gatehouse. Is because of these close partnerships, when we talk about safety and security, as so many people have been recognized as being a part of our internal review, safety and security is all of our business. And we take that matter extremely seriously. And as Dr. Braybrand mentioned, although we're a national model, we're recognized by the United States Department of Education and a number of other organizations for being forward-leading in the area of security. We realize through this internal review that we have opportunities for continuous improvement, much like we look at for all of our opportunities for our students here in Fairfax County Public Schools. In your board docs, you'll find that you have three documents. You've got a one-pager that really is the business case to talk about what I'm going to go through, really a review narrative document, and then the presentation that I'm going to go through right now. And certainly we'll open up to any questions after that. So I'm going to go through the slide deck. There are about 13 slides that I'll be going through and just talk about, a few things like the scope. Okay, so it's working. So when we take a look at this, we went ahead and took a look at all of our internal policies and procedures to make sure that if there was anything out of the ordinary in those regulations, any improvements that we needed to make, we wanted to start with the practices of the rules that we have and the framework we have to work within. We took a look at the Code of Virginia and also all of our regulations to see if there was anything that needed to be adjusted, modified, or updated. We also met with Mr. Vaccarello. I can't say enough about the work that he's done, he and his team. Met with a number of input stakeholder groups in Fairfax County Public Schools, everything from students, teacher representatives. We had community representatives and the PTSAs. We got a lot of community feedback of opinions and things that we needed to look at, and people external to Fairfax County, but also the parents in the community, and also the administrators. And the leadership team also provided a lot of feedback and input. We analyzed all that information and really in regards to how it relates to all of the regulations and the actual state code requirements, and kind of look at where we kind of sat in relation to that. The best practices, well, as I mentioned, we recognized as one of the best practice operations in the area of security for school security. The National Center of Education Statistics reports most common types are kind of intuitive: locked buildings, requirements for faculty and staff to wear IDs, electronic identification systems. Security staff was something that came up, but nationally you only have about 70% of middle and high schools in school systems across the country. Moving on, our practices go a little bit beyond that, considerably beyond that. We have a comprehensive division-wide crisis management plan that includes, we call that the crisis management plan, we call it the Red Book that you have before you. In that book, it talks about the narrative of all the different definitions. You also have that information in your narrative document that's attached in board docs. Annual individual school crisis plans that we go through and include evacuation, lockdown, shelter in place, and parent reunification plans. Strict visitor controls requiring employee and contractor IDs, door access technology to aid in visitor control. Compliance with our drill schedules. Each and every year we'll go through this about the number of drills that are required by law and our compliance with that. And our robust partnerships for the mental health supports. We cannot stress enough how the mental health supports that you're going to hear more about in the Goal 2 Caring Culture kept coming out in all of our conversations. So concerns from our stakeholders, even down to the student level. What do we do when this happens? We constantly were being told and told again that we have an opportunity. We've got great programs out there. We've had crisis management teams that are trained every year, reports that are submitted each year annually for safety and security staff to review, on and on and on and on. But people, students, staff, administrators said, what do I do when this happens, or if I'm in this part of the building? That constantly came up. So we have an opportunity for the need for additional training on security, including the lockdown drills, direction for the students during that, and navigating the escape routes. Classroom doors with interior locks. That was an issue that people said that they felt they were uncomfortable with because we have a number of locks that have a key requirement on both sides of the lock. And people brought up when substitutes were there and some of the more obvious things that really, even though we might have had a plan in place for that, the practice and the actuality were a little cumbersome.
And we do want to be clear that all of our classrooms do have locks.
They do.
So it's very important to point that out.
Interior and exterior cameras. That came up from the administrators time and time and time again. Not only is it a deterrent, but also something where a quick location within a facility, if something's going down, can be spotted and addressed to and responded to. The mental health supports for students, I mentioned that earlier. Security staff, the need for additional security staff. You'll see in the not recommended but considered that there is a whole host of security staff opportunities. I think there are a number of them and broken down in different ways for your consideration and review. Security outside the school building. What do we do if we're outside the school building? How do we get secure? How can we get more people out roaming that are our security staff on the exterior of the buildings and so forth? Door monitoring and access. In transitions, who's monitoring the doors, having a more regulated process associated with that. Remote access to public address systems and student IDs came up. This tablet really just talks about our recommendations. What we recommended in our review was to enhance training for the lockdown drills, reinforce the proper electronic door access, conduct tabletop exercises annually. We currently do tabletop exercises once every 3 years at the elementary level and once every 2 years at the secondary. There's a need to have those tabletop exercises performed each and every year.
So to me, in nuggets, that's a big nugget. We've had a 2 to 3 year cycle on our tabletop. That's what are you supposed to do when a critical incident? We're going to move, or we're going to recommend to this board today, moving to an annual training for every single school.
And to elaborate on that, there were 2 specific cases this year where 2 schools, Herndon High School, had a tabletop exercise about a tornado. Well, if you recall, they actually executed that a week later when a tornado warning came through that area. Stone Middle School, their tabletop had to do with a fire drill. So each tabletop may vary depending on the topic that's brought up to be discussed. And they, in fact, had fire in the community where a number of units went up, and they had to exercise their drill that they had practiced a couple weeks prior. So require the principals to be included in the safety and security briefing annually. Review and evaluate the school-based threat assessment. This is a huge component that we can talk a lot in. I'm sure Goal 2 will go into that. But it's really getting folks on the radar in the process of making sure they're getting all the supports that they need, and staff's constant updating of that information of students who might be struggling. Continued compliance with all our required drills, increased communication and collaboration with principals, and the communication with school communities. I mentioned before the dual key interior locks. As Mr. Smith mentioned, all of our doors do lock, but we have a plan to replace the dual key interior classroom door locks. They're about 20% of the total number of locks that we have that are dual key. So it's a small number, but it's still something that we think really needs to be addressed. Deploy interior and exterior TV cameras. That's a little larger, not really in terms of the dollar cost, but again, it kept coming up again and again from our stakeholders. And then enhance the school-based mental health supports. You'll see a number of positions. It's a considerable number of positions, and that relates to the fact that it kept coming up. Now, I can go into the detailed recommendations in the appendix, but what it really comes down to is what I said at the beginning, the need for enhanced training. The fact that Dr. Brabrand said we're once every 3 years at the elementary level and once every 2 years at the secondary level is really just really was proven by the comments mostly from the students and the staff in the schools that we want to feel better about what we do. We want to know what we're supposed to do in the case of a lockdown. What we want to do is we want to make sure we're communicating, articulating across the division that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, including the students. Reinforce the electronic door access to provide training on the proper visitor management, and actually having, like we do with bus duties, there are many transition times in a school, but having somebody who is responsible for supporting that. Again, I mentioned the tabletop exercises annually. I cannot stress that enough. It is a good program that we have. It's a great program, but it needs to be better. The training recommendations require school safety and security briefings. During the first week back, we go through so many different drills that we have. In addition to that, we need to make sure, and with the new administrators that we get, we need to make sure that all administrators are trained each and every year. Continuous review of the school threat assessments. That's in partnership with the Department of Special Services, really ensuring that the students with potential for violent behavior are receiving their proper mental health supports, as I mentioned. Increased communication with the school communities. Mr. Guilfoyle has got an RFP out right now, I believe, that is really talking about how we're going to be communicating a little more effectively. We got a lot of feedback from parents. A number of them actually knew about reunification, knew about the communication, knew what each of the individual language terms meant in terms of if a school goes into lockdown and secure the building, et cetera. But we felt there was a need to expand that more because there were a number of people who really just didn't have an understanding. Physical and technical security recommendations, those are the classroom locks and the CCTV systems. Coupled with that, there are human capital recommendations for the support of those initiatives, and also to provide that training. We believe 8 additional Office of Safety and Security folks would be able to accommodate that training with the frequency that we were talking about with the tabletop exercises, and 2 additional positions for the update of the CCTV to get that program going. Because that's a big, large capital initiative, it would take some time, and we can talk further about how long something like that would take and how we might be considered to be looking at funding that. Because, as I said, all of these were pieces and parts that came out. In your board docs documentation, you have the full narrative that really goes into a lot greater detail for each and every one of those categories. But I want to go ahead and give you those sound bites right up front, the things that we felt from the staff's perspective, as again, this was an internal safety and security review that we did across the division, and we're open for any questions you have this time.
Great. I have a couple on the list. We'll go and get started and just put your hands up. I first have Sandy, followed by Karen Keys-Gamaro.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the very thorough report that you've done. This gave a great overview of where we are, and I appreciate you providing us with the Red Book, too. I've seen it before, but it's good to have that in hand, too. I had several questions. First of all, about the cameras. I see that you note that we're the only ones in the regions that don't have a complete system. Is that right?
Yes.
So my question here, I mean, it's been listed as a best practice, but do we have evidence that this actually works to prevent violence at a school?
I can tell you from the principals I've spoken with within our school division, a number of times the fact that students know that a camera is there has precluded them from doing anything that might have been harmful. In a previous division that I was in Loudoun County, whenever there was something that went off in a building, I was able to check that building, look at it to see whether or not if a fire alarm went off, to see if there's smoke in any individual hallway. I was able to monitor the evacuation process, the safeness of that, how quick the students got out and the administrators and how they were managed. I could do that all from my desktop without having to go ahead and then hop in my vehicle or go out to the scene. But again, our principals have said, yes, it not only has been good in a deterrent, but it's also been good when accusations have made against one student against another, for them to actually look at what actually occurred. And it's really helped and assisted in calming some parents down that got the wrong story first. So it's been really assistive.
So I can see the value of that after the fact, finding out what happened. My question really, and it's hard to prove a negative, right? It's hard to prove that something didn't happen because of this. I'm thinking more in terms of, I believe, didn't they have cameras at Columbine? Didn't they have interior cameras there?
They've had cameras in a number of schools that have had situations. I mean, if you,
did they have cameras at
to your point,
Parkland?
Ms. Evans, if you want to say that any safety, any security measure that we put in place for schools that are welcoming to the community, to parents, and have those opportunities, I don't think if somebody wants to do something bad, then hopefully everything we have in place will deter them from picking a school in Fairfax County.
I guess we do want to maximize where we put our resources, and that's why I guess I would like a bit of follow-up. It's listed as a best practice, and I understand why, but I would like to know to what extent it's where we've had the worst problems. You know, often we've had young people who have come in and they themselves are prepared not to leave that day. In other words, you know, it's not a matter of them getting caught. It's a matter of they are determined, as you say, to do something. So I would like a better understanding of if cameras have actually deterred that kind of thing, you know. And so do we know if Parkland had security
I can go ahead
cameras?
and follow up with a better, more detailed aspect of cameras and where they've been determined as a deterrent. You know, to your point, you're asking a question about something that would have had to have happened that didn't end up in those same results.
Right.
And I think that might be a little more subjective, but we'll definitely follow up and see if we can't find anything where something was supposed to happen.
Right, and in addition to that, I would also be interested where we have had these awful situations, if there were cameras, and if they were any help at all, or if they simply weren't because it happened too fast. And we know these things happen very fast.
I can't answer that. In terms of location of something going on inside a facility, yeah, I'll provide you with information where they were able to identify. Some of our campuses are rather large, but the ability to identify a location and let law enforcement go in at the appropriate areas is significant. But again, we'll provide more detail.
I would like more on that. Thank you. Because, you know, $20 million is significant. You know, that's clearly significant. And it compares with $2.3 million that we're putting into mental health, you know, by the recommendation anyway. And that is another question. You're talking about 18 mental health professionals going into schools. Do you have you identified the 18 schools at this point?
No, I'll let Dr. Johnson answer that. If you'd mind.
In looking at the 18 positions, we have full-time social workers and psychologists at middle schools and high schools. We would be looking at how we can implement those services across elementary schools, at high schools, excuse me. So we have full-time at high school. We're looking to put them full-time at middle school and then evaluate our data to see where we need to add additional clinical support at the elementary level.
So, well, with 18 positions, how is that going to cover that much territory?
So the schools already have psychologists and social workers in them. So we're not starting from scratch. We're not adding a full-time person to each one. We're trying to ensure that there is a full-time person in each one. So
see.
if there's a half-time person, for example, at
This
a
will
middle
fill
school
that
now,
out. I see.
this would fill that out to make it
Okay.
a full-time position.
Okay,
So
thank
there'll be
you.
either a full-time psychologist or a social worker at every middle school.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. I with the training and the drilling, I've read enough about this. I've read books on who survives in tragedies, and a lot of it does come down to who's trained, who's drilled. So I think that that's an important piece of what you're doing. So I appreciate you raising that and enhancing that. I had a town hall meeting recently, and Ms. Vaticonda joined us. I appreciate her thoughts, and I'm sure she'll have more comments later. But to the point that you've made, all of the students said that in terms of the lockdown, that it was always done so far. It had been done during class time, and none of them knew what they were supposed to do during pastime or at lunchtime. So part of your recommendation is to fill that gap now, and is that correct?
Absolutely. We have described detailed information on what people are supposed to be doing in the Red Book. It's really just making sure that awareness, that people are informed, and we can go through different scenarios so everybody has a real fundamental understanding.
Okay. Are the students currently supposed to know what to do if it happens during lunch?
The reality of the training is, our feedback that we had gotten is that it seemed to get a little diluted because of the sheer numbers.
Yeah.
While the administrators might go through the individual training and then they have to train their staff, all of the teachers, you imagine the number of teachers you have at a high school or secondary school, and then getting down to the students. That's a large opportunity for us to improve our implementation and fidelity of the training.
Well, I'm glad you've identified that as an area where you can make some improvements. I did attend a session at NSBA involving this issue, and one of the takeaways from it was that when threats occur, so many times it's actually the students who know about it first because of social media. And one of their points there was creating both a school climate where students know they can report and know where to report and to whom to report. I'm not sure I saw that as part of your recommendations, but I do think that that's important, that if students hear about a threat, that they know exactly who to report to. Is that something that you have discussed?
Yes, it is. In fact, we currently do have really excellent reporting from our students, beyond just if you see something, say something,
Yes.
but also our tip line and the text to tip as well.
Okay.
It's pretty amazing and robust. In fact, that has really helped us and assisted us this year significantly. I'll just say that.
And you feel that the students are well aware?
I don't feel everybody's aware of everything that they should be. That's why we're asking for the additional training, so that we can take that to another level.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent, and that's not a high budget item. That's being sure people know. And then lastly, and I may have a few more questions, but I'll stop so other people can ask. But on reunification, do we currently, does each school have a place where parents are designated?
Yes, they do. And they also have a sister school, if you will, in the event that they have to evacuate their facility.
And so how are parents informed about that? Are they informed at the beginning of the year? If anything happens, this is your reunification location?
There's information that is provided, I believe, to the parents. Mr. McEnroe, do you have anything you want to clarify about how they were made aware of that?
So I'm not clear as to what that communication is to parents, but certainly part of the communication package we're working on with OCCR is to notify parents, whether it's through KIT, whether it's through social media, as to where that is. I don't know at the beginning of the year. I would submit to you that given the situation, it's very dynamic. So although we may designate a particular relocation or reunification, that all may change given the event itself.
Right. I think it would be useful, though, to know, at least for a parent to know up front, what is the sister school or what is the planned location, even if ultimately it has to change. Thank you very much. I think you've done an excellent job, and with that follow-up, I'll be happy to see what more we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. I would ask everyone to keep their first comments at least to 5 minutes or so. That was about 10 minutes just for reference. So Karen Keys-Gamarra, followed by Janie, and then Karen Corbett-Sanders.
All right, thank you for this report, and it is helpful, and I hope we'll continue to have some discussions, but I know that this has been a lot of work, and I want you to know that I appreciate it. I want to start with the mental health support, and I forget what page it was on, but there was some mention of threat assessments, and I'd like to delve a little bit into how that is done. Based on my experience both on the school board and off, oftentimes the accuracy of that threat assessment depends on the experience of whoever is doing it. And I have seen situations where, everybody makes mistakes. And so I'd like to see if we are taking any steps to improve the fidelity of that process. So I'll just go through all my concerns since Ryan's trying to stay on course. And so that would possibly be a next step, depending on your answer, as to, with respect to how we can get greater consistency, and whether we are including like the ACE evaluation and being able to understand exactly where that child is. I, too, wanted to follow up on Ms. Evans's comments with respect to communication with the parents, with respect to clear directions and what type of plan we would have to make sure that we are communicating more on this issue. In my town halls, office hours, et cetera, parents are asking about safety initiatives. I told them we would be getting this report. They also wanted to know how they could help their students to be more safe. And I think gathered from my conversations, one of the things that I have told people is just to tell your kids not to open that door for anybody, right? And so if you could give us some directions as to how we can communicate with the community to add to this process so that it is a collaborative effort, I think that would be helpful. I also wanted to talk about the door system. I know that believe I read that we all have electronic access, but it depends on the age of the building as to how that's set up. Some places I go to, they're in a little room and they have to go through the office. Other places, you're kind of on an honor system. And so I'd like to see, and I have seen some schools that I've gone to recently where they have actually taken a person and put them at that door. So you have to go through that person before they can actually enter the school. So I'd like to see how we're going to address that, because I don't think we can change the entry of all of our schools, but we can come up with a plan and try to communicate that to parents, because that is one of the things that they have communicated to me. And then I think lastly, I wanted to be clear in terms of how we create avenues for kids to be able to discuss and community members to discuss their safety concerns. And so I'd like to hear what our plans would be to address that, to make sure we're bringing the community into a discussion with respect to safety and how they can positively add to that process.
I'd like to introduce Marion Panarelli if she wants to go ahead and take the first
Sure.
two.
I'll just give you a very quick response. So we utilize a threat assessment process that was developed by Dr. Dewey Cornell at UVA and has then been trained around the state. So we've been in touch with Dr. Cornell, and we'll be reviewing our steps that we now have in practice and looking whether there are any areas that we could improve. So we're already scheduled to do that this summer.
In regards to the next three questions that you had the ACE evaluation. I think it was one of them that you had asked. And then the communication with the parents, the question that she asked around the ACE evaluation. Could you clarify what?
Well, I know that that's a way of trying to identify children, and I realize this may be a little touchy with respect to whether parents want their kids to be questioned regarding what they're going through. But the ACE evaluation kind of helps you to figure out what that child is dealing with. And so I didn't know whether that was a part of our process or not.
Adverse childhood experiences. I was going to ACE our adult our adult program, and got it. We are not currently utilizing a full ACE screening, so that there is a screener that you can use that identifies whether a child has experienced certain adverse childhood experiences. It's like a 40 or 60 question, just has this occurred to you, with you. We have been using it to some extent with parents of preschoolers as they're coming in to try to get that information, and but we are not currently using it broadly across the board.
Okay, in regards to the next three items, the document that you have in here goes into a little greater detail for.
Okay.
Excuse me. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, but I'll just briefly make a comment, and then I'll let Mr. Vaccarello go ahead and add to anything that he might feel I'm left out. The communication with parents, it does address it in here about making sure that we have better communication and more opportunities to actually have those conversations that you mentioned, because the stakeholders, we did tease out a lot of that desire and need, in fact. Electronic access, you mentioned it about posting and having somebody, it does address that in this document as well. When we go through renovation, which all of our schools are on a cycle, and the cycle's not going as fast as we would all like, we do build vestibules where they don't have a choice. They have to go into the main office. However, that being said, we have a number of schools where it is an honor system. So the point about having somebody who is assigned that responsibility, or perhaps someone who's been vetted as a volunteer for the community, for the school, there are many different opportunities for that. But again, that's mentioned and talked to in here. And then to create avenues to discuss their safety concerns. One of the recommendations is to make sure that we have a safety and security access on the client communications right up front so people can continue to communicate with us. We've been getting a lot of information given what's been going on nationally. So we've had a lot of parents that have contacted us, but really putting that a little more up front and making sure that folks can go ahead and get to us sooner.
And Ms. Keys-Kamara, what I did hear you say too, with regard to school board members, speaking to the community, we can create some talking points around the report and provide that to board members so that when you're out, you can have a more digestible form of the report to talk about what we're focused on, some of the best practices that we currently utilize within the system, and then however the board chooses to implement the recommendations, and we can create some talking points around what those are and how they'll be implemented within the schools.
And if you would include in that what giving direction to the community, or what recommendations we can make to parents who very much want to be a part of this, keeping their schools safe.
Okay.
I did have one last comment I forgot to mention. You can add to your list. I wanted to just comment on the cameras. I have worked with a number of jurisdictions where they do have cameras, and I actually agree with you, Mr. Plattenberg. They've been very helpful in terms of being able to figure out exactly what happened and how to improve in the future. And so I would like to hear more information with respect to how we can do it more reasonable. I think it was a $20 million budget item. And I would say in working with children and improving situations, the cameras have been very helpful, but that I think that it also needs to be a part of that discussion that we have with parents. They have concerns about privacy, et cetera, which is, I won't go into the body of law that that touches on. But I personally would look forward to seeing how that could possibly be implemented, or if it is even feasible in our circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vaccarello, was there something you wanted to add to the analytics part about the cameras and then?
Sure. So going back to analytics, sure, it doesn't stop a bad guy from walking in the building. But there are camera analytics that allow you, the analytics allow cameras to focus on activity, right? So an example would be movement in a parking lot. It could be, and I'm using it for the bad guy approach, could be a bad guy getting out of a car carrying an instrument or a rifle that gives staff time to say that doesn't look right. The camera system, the analytics alert to these things, and it buys you more time based on the analytic piece.
Okay, great. Continuing on, just for reference, that was 9 minutes. Janie, Karen Corbett-Sanders, and Dahlia.
Okay, a number of my questions have already been asked, but I will concur with some of the pieces mentioned. The cameras, just for the history of it, it was interesting when we first began talking about cameras on school property. It was very, very controversial, and parents did not want it. So it is interesting we sort of moved down a different path, and the high school principals have always wanted them because they see it as an advantage for many many things. I'm pleased to see the recommendation for mental health. Clearly, that is something that, for a variety of reasons, whether it's for safety or just for good mental health for our students, and as we've gone through difficult budget times, we've not been able to fund the mental health personnel that we feel is necessary for our children. So I was very pleased to see that. The double entry door with the vestibules, I know particularly parents in elementary schools, they are concerned about that, and that has to do with renovations. I believe that all of our schools now they can visually see the front door, because I know that was sort of the first interesting, and I don't know, Mr. Plattenberg, I know most of the schools have, the front office can at least see who's at the front door. I think
Well, they do have the AI phones for
Right.
access.
Right, exactly.
But in terms of visual, I'm not 100% sure that they all have direct visual access.
Right, but that has been a push for
Mhm.
some years.
It
So
was.
as we continue to try to make those access points, and certainly buzz in, I know that pretty much all the schools now are implementing visitor passes and ID badges in a much more routine way. Initially, some of the parents were not real pleased with that, but I think everybody's somehow become more accustomed to that. Our ability to do threat assessments, I've been very impressed, even with the amount of personnel that we've had, and how quickly and how thoroughly we do threat assessments, because that's critical to ward off mental health crises that some students are going through, in addition to simple safety. And I think with additional staff, we will get even better at that. I am concerned that as we do threat assessments and with social media and how fast information travels, on the one hand, we want kids to be able to report very quickly if they think somebody may be in trouble. But at the same time, you also don't want the community in panic constantly, because kids text, kids write things on paper towels. So there is sort of a balance between keeping everybody safe and at the same time not creating endless panic with everything that children may decide to do, say, or write. So that's a tough balancing act. The reunification plans, one of the interesting things in Fairfax County Public Schools, because we were a target in 9/11, there are some things that we learned on that September day as we attempted to keep our children in our schools safe, and particularly reunification, which was very difficult that day. So we've had to deal with some of that before. I think those are my issues. I guess the other part is that when our schools become aware of an unusual activity in a neighborhood or an unusual individual who has been cited, we bring our kids in. We don't necessarily do a lockdown, but we very quickly bring everybody in, and the police are usually notified, and we wait for them to figure out, is there something dangerous, is it not? And if there's just routine police activity in the neighborhood, we will bring everybody in. I don't know, you may want to include that in the report, but I think that's an important thing that we routinely do.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of our standard operating procedures. I mean, that's to secure the building. When we put in secure the building, it's up until the law enforcement folks clear the area and give us the all clear before we go ahead and back to our usual routines.
That's right. And a suspicious person, it can be just somebody, the elementary teacher's out on the playground says, I don't know this person. They seem to be wanting to cross. So we set a very high bar for suspicion on our campuses.
And I think that training piece will be key as we think about how we train our principals. If I think back to my Franklin Sherman days,
exactly.
In McLean with so many banks around and several bank robberies, we were
Right.
always pulling kids back into the building. And I remember the first time we had to do that, we wanted it to be second nature for our teachers and for our staff to understand how to do that. For a Franklin Sherman, when you are in that environment, you do it quite often. If you don't do it regularly, training will be very important so that all of the things that we talk about do become second nature for our staff and for our students, and so that you're not fumbling for something in the midst of an emergency.
Exactly. So I think it's important that we let parents know how routine that plan is, and that we've done that for a long time. We are an open carry state, and I know some parents are very concerned. What happens if you see someone walking about. And so we do have a plan for that. I think those are my topics, and I appreciate the recommendations.
Okay, thanks, Janie. That was 6 minutes. Karen Corbett-Sanders, Dahlia, and Niharika.
I'll speak fast. Thank you. I think it's a good first steps in a report, and I appreciate it. There are a couple of questions that I have in follow-up to Ms. Evans regarding the drills, making sure that we have drills for kids who are at recess, at cafeteria time, or changing classrooms. I think that's important, especially and for kids who are in trailers. So additionally, as far as training and how to deal with having a conversation with kids about the anxiety created by the concerns over security. I've gotten a lot of feedback from parents that when we've gone on lockdown and there hasn't been a reason given to the kids on why they're at lockdown, they send very anxious texts to their parents. And so we need to be upfront in dealing with that. Third, as far as our notification process, when we notify parents that we are on lockdown, we probably should be more clear as to why we're on lockdown, because sometimes that's not included in the notification, and that increases the anxiety. Additionally, would like to understand a little bit more about whether you're planning on doing a building-by-building security review, or can we use our SROs to do that building-by-building security review, because some of our schools have unique characteristics, either by a number of trailers or by multi-building campuses. And so having that detailed look and then incorporating that into a review, I think, is very important for enhancements. Last, or two additional, would like to understand a little bit more about why you don't think student IDs are necessary. I know that there are technologies that allow the student IDs for swiping in and out of doors, and a lot of conversation in the community has been about the run, hide, fight approach. It's something that I don't necessarily think is a great idea, but I was surprised it wasn't included in your report. And lastly, security staffing at each of our schools doesn't seem to have, we have security staff at each of our schools, but it's not numbers of students dependent. And so I would like to understand whether you think that we should have a fixed number of security officers based on how big a school is or the campus, because I know some principals are trading educational professionals for security professionals because of the makeup of their or the design of their buildings.
You raise a good point. Some of the things are in the actual added document that you have, and some of that greater detail. It talks about the formula, if you will, of those security specialists. And to your point, I know some schools feel it's a little more important for them, and they might do trade off to get another security specialist. And we work with those schools that have those requests. Yeah, you had mentioned something regarding the particular design of a school. And each of those tabletops are done individually at that school with the crisis team. So usually the SRO is a part of that. I'm going to let Mr. Vaccarello address the fact that you don't see run, hide, fight in there or ALICE training. But we did take a look at each and every one of those. And with our law enforcement partners with Fairfax County Police Department, I'm going to let Tom go ahead and address that.
Real quickly on the individual school security assessments. No, I understand there's an overall plan, but before school opens every year, is there somebody who goes door by door, building by building, and does a review of that building and says it needs more enhancements? It needs more enhancements because it's right on Route 50 or on Route 1, or has 6 banks nearby, or, looking at it from that standpoint and going into every trailer to make sure it's secure.
Right. So annually, my staff inspects every school. It's a safety and security inspection. They make notes that go, and they cover all aspects of security. However, I'd submit to you the next level up is, should we do a secure assessment With the addition of the staff we're looking at here, these are really the subject matter experts that do safety assessments and security assessments to look at things like intended threat as well as accidents. But we do inspect every school annually to that end. Run, hide, fight. So run, hide, fight is a term. It's an options-based approach, much like Alice is. So we just completed training all of our administrative centers with run, hide, fight. We believe it's more intended for adults that have to make their own decisions, and not students or a teacher that's in the it's responsible for 30 students in a room for a student to make those decisions. So we are very explicit as to what lockdown means and what options teachers have with students. But run, hide, fight is for an atmosphere like right here, adults that are going to make their own decision. And it's a name. We have the same things. We called it avoiding the threat. We say get to a secure place. We don't talk about fighting. We don't instruct students yet how to fight or defend themselves. But it's mentioned from the standpoint of having a plan generally. It's a topic that I would really lean on the instructional side to get expertise as to what does that look like for a second grader? What does it look like for a middle schooler? So it's all stuff we're going to think about, but that's just a quick summary of options-based training. We like to keep it simple, and that's what the experts say. Keep it simple. Careful as you elevate into these option-based approaches, you may confuse people, and they drop the ball on basic stuff like calling 911, like locking their door.
So as a next step, if you could just incorporate what you just said into the report,
definitely.
that would be helpful.
Okay.
Okay, great. That was 6 minutes. Next we have Dahlia, Niharika, and Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be brief as well. Appreciate the report. A couple of comments for you, questions, and for our board. The first one, I think it was brought up. Definitely appreciate both doing the drills and increasing the safety. I do think we want, and I know our schools will work to be cautious, around developmentally appropriate communication. I know another school district in Virginia had a lack of communication and created quite a bit of fear in one of their schools. So, ensuring we continue to do that appropriately. Also that, parents, especially parents who are maybe feeling uncomfortable, not knowing how to be in school, be involved with their kids, that we are really reaching out and ensuring that with the increased security, they're not being left out of their students' education and the ability to be there, volunteer, et cetera. So hoping that we also work with schools around that, I would love to hear about. I know we have many concerns and wish we could do more and are always looking at the price tag. This is where I would implore our board. I know I've had a few conversations with some of our legislators at the state level. I think it's high time that we work with the Assembly. I hope that we can make it one of our priorities for the next legislative session, working with Michael Malloy and our liaison, that additional mental health support and even perhaps the security cameras and other things can start to be funded a little more on the state level. I know we end up doing so much locally. So I hope as a board, I don't know if that's a next step to have that conversation, to bring that up in our priorities. I think it's a good time to do that.
Yes, if I could remind the board, social workers and psychologists are not in the Virginia standards of quality. They are not even in the basic SOQ for schools.
So hope we can work on that together. I know we have delegates, senators who are happy to do that with us. And then a couple questions for you. If you could specifically mention security around our temporary classrooms. I know that's been a question. And finally, for us and for the public, I don't know if it was in the report. If you could just give a brief overview of what that tabletop discussion is, I think might be helpful just to understand what happens during that conversation. Thank you. I think that's it. Keeping it simple for you.
Great. 2 minutes. Niharika, Elizabeth, then Tammy.
Oh, wait, could I need them to respond.
Oh, okay. Please.
Just the last two things.
You're going to go to 5 minutes now.
I don't know if that's a Tom question or.
So temporary classrooms. When I say trailers are secure, they all have locking doors. And when it comes to lockdown drills, there's no differentiation from a classroom or a trailer. We do not bring kids inside. We do in a secure the building situation possibly, but the door is locked, it is secure. Certainly, it's not a brick and mortar building when you talk about bad guys and the things that they can do. But our plan and our instruction, which of course will be embellished here with this new training, there's no real change in plans as to what we do in a trailer versus a classroom. We lock down, we get away from the vision panels, and we remain quiet and we notify. There's no real outward change in our tactics regarding trailers.
So I guess I'm wondering, because as we know, on some of our schools, it's much easier to access the area where the
Yes.
trailers are. So.
Right. So there's also the issues you expand upon transition between classes, kids coming in and out of the building. So we look at CCTV to help us with this. We look at door management to help us with this. We look at boots on the ground to help us with this. And obviously, if you get to the different grade levels, there's security staff at middle and high schools, not a lot in elementary schools to watch kids through transition. A big campus like West Potomac, for example, big sweeping campus where kids are transitioning. It's a matter of knowing when your peak times are, posting people, and staying alert for those particular situations other than door access. And so kids going to and from the building, yes, there's that issue with the trailers, but until we get everybody in the building, that will always exist.
And on page 8, it references the point about tabletop of the thick document, I'll just say. It talks about tabletop exercise and you know, what they do, and it gives you a better definition.
Yeah.
It's page 8 for your reference.
Yeah, so tabletops are twofold. It's about a 2-hour process. And the first hour of it is familiarization with our terms and our procedures and the forms and the process. The second hour is an actual scenario. So we say, here's what's happening. A truck is turned over in front of your building, or a tornado is, you've just been alerted. What are you going to do when you go into roll? We do that for about an hour.
If I could just share real quick, the tabletops as a principal was a confidence builder for me as a school leader. Do I know what to do when a critical incident happens? And moving from a 2 to 3 year cycle, we have principles that change every year. Going to annual is going to be one of the, if you adopt that proposal, is one of the biggest things we can do to make everybody in the building, from the school leadership on down, feel confident. I know what to do when a variety of situations take place. But the tabletop has always been, and it's been a wonderful partnership with our police department. The fire department comes. We have a whole team of county and school folks in there helping schools think their way through different instances. And I got to say, Tom and his staff, it's been traditionally something we've done well. We're still doing it well, but we've got to increase the frequency in our view. That's staff's recommendation.
Okay, Niharika Elizabeth Tammy.
Thank you. So on the training recommendations, I have 2 questions. So if we already have the procedures for the lunch and passing period drills, what's the feasibility to move those to short term and start implementing them within the next year? And in general, is there a possibility to add like morning and after school drills to this when buses are unloading and loading and some students are already in the building, or during activity blocks when students aren't really strictly in classrooms? And as a general point, so you mentioned we have procedures but students aren't always aware. So what's the feasibility of us doing awareness videos during the first part of the year the way that we do SR&R and other things like that?
I love your questions because they're always strictly on point. That's some of the information that we identified, preparing a number of ways of getting that message out through videos, through for our staff, My PLT. The technology folks have talked about how they can provide those mediums to us, and the need to go ahead and get that orientation out and that awareness. Some of the other drills you talk about, they're mentioned again on page 8, the full-scale exercises and some of the functional exercises. They talk to, and that's why we've asked for the additional training, so that we can have that articulation about what do you do in 20 minutes in the morning when students are being dropped off? What do you do in 20 minutes in the afternoon when people are being released from school? So yes, that's the purpose of the training piece. Anything that comes into that category classification of training is where we really saw an opportunity. We've got a great framework. It's the execution of that framework that we have to hone in on. And the points that you just made about different ways and means to train not only the faculty but also the students, make sure they have awareness and to have those actual drills are definitely part of the training initiative.
And it's also important to have that follow-up with students. So after a drill, so the drill has come to completion, we come back to the classroom, and then we talk about what actually happened versus having the drill and then coming right back to the lesson. Taking that time to engage students, get feedback, allay any concerns that students might have. That follow-up discussion will be very important.
And currently we have, we go through our fire drills once a week for the first 20 days of school, and then once a month thereafter. Tornado drills in March of each academic year, bus evacuation drills in September and February. Those are required of each academic year. And then the lockdown drills, too, within the first 20 days of school, plus 2 additional drills, and one of which must occur in January when students come back. So we do have a number of drills that are required that we go through. It's the execution and then the analysis and then the review afterwards that certainly has the opportunity for us to improve. Absolutely.
And we're definitely going to, one of the things that will happen is that there will be not just the drill, there'll be the conversation and question and answers for students. And one of the drills will in fact be mandatory, that you have to do a drill during a transition period, whether it be in the hallway, whether it be in the cafeteria, that's plugged in.
That's another big nugget right there. Say that one more time, Tom, for the board.
The mandatory part. So
the mandatory of not just the traditional everybody's in classroom drill, right?
Yeah, it's too sterile of an environment.
Right.
So we want to expand upon it based upon the feedback, and we knew this internally as well.
And over the years, even when I remember like my third year, I'm like, should we try it? There's the nervousness of trying it during lunch or trying it during passing because it could be messy. But we need to go ahead and really tell our folks it's okay. We need to do that so that if, God forbid, something were to happen, that there's a confidence in sort of the chaotic nature of what a school is. If there's a crisis, there's going to be chaos, and we've trained in the most pristine conditions. We've got to mix it up more, and that is one of the things we're going to be able to do more of now.
One more question. So I know that you mentioned like we do 2 drills during the first 20 days of school for fire and lockdown, but why don't we do the same number of fire drills as we do lockdown drills? Because that's become one of students' bigger concerns.
That's a good question. It's currently the ones that are required by law and are reporting to be in compliance. That's the piece I talked about, the first part, that's compliance and conformance. But that's excellent feedback. We can do additional drills. We're not limited by the number of drills that we choose to do. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, Tammy, and Megan.
I make no promises on 5 minutes. As soon as this was put onto our agenda, this is over 200 buildings, 190,000 students, 40,000 employees. I don't think there's anything that's more important that we've covered. So as long as this takes, I think we should give it its due time. One of the things, and I'm so glad Niharika just brought it up, that Ms. McLaughlin and I experienced in our student town halls was, and I see it as a sort of a little bit of a gap here, the concept of tabletop exercises involves adults. And I just did some quick back of the envelope math. If there are about 24,000, there's about 14,000 teachers. I don't know if you put another 10,000 on top of it, 24,000 employees to 190,000 students. That means there's 8 times as many students in the facilities as there are adults. So I'm concerned that the student perspective, and I saw in here at one point, it said that there was stakeholder input. I don't know how that was acquired. I don't recall seeing students necessarily involved. But one of the key things that students shared is that, one, there's lots of fire drills. And to my knowledge, I think the statistic is in 50 years, no child's ever been lost in the United States to a fire at school. They didn't feel that the ratio of fire drills to sort of what is the omnipresent threat that really is in existence were relevant to them. The other thing that they said was that they were always doing the lockdown drills in the same period. So they knew what would happen, what that teacher would do, but they didn't know what any of their other teachers would do. And quite often it would involve things like, this student was assigned to moving this bookcase in front of the door. So, if that student's not there that day, or they're in a different class, or they're in a cafeteria, there's a real sense of disconnectedness by the students in what their role is, if they're any place other than the pre-populated, planned location. So things like ballistic whiteboards that we could have, slid in front of could be easily slid in front of a door. What the ratio of, I see the locks are recommended on a going forward basis. How many locks do we have that have the push button now versus how many that we don't? And what would it cost? What would it cost to do all the locks basically? I mean, you can't do them all immediately, but basically immediately. That becomes, a paramount issue to lock those doors to prevent somebody getting into the classroom. Because if we can get the kids into the classroom and you can lock the door, that's a massive, coverage on the threat. The active shooter technology, I've got a number of questions, so I'll let you take those, and then I'll moderate the rest of my questions based on some of those answers.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Schultz. Some of the points that you brought up, which were the same that Enrique brought up as well, that's the same feedback we got, was the student involvement, student awareness about being a part of the solution, and their awareness on what to do, et cetera. So that's part of what we've taken back and are planning for our incorporation about our training that we're going to be doing in the event that we get these additional positions. In regards to the ballistic boards, we'll follow up with you on next steps with that. And then the third thing that you brought up was locks. Oh, yeah. 80%, all of our, getting back to the beginning, all of our school doors, interior doors locked, right? There are 1,880 or 20% of ours that have dual lock sets requiring a key on both sides, and that's not good. And I think that's what you referred to. We put in, to your point, the money that's included in there is to get all locks so they can do what you're talking about for a teacher to be able to do, to be able to pull the kids in and
Well,
lock
there's
it and
one
not
in
have to have a
particular
key.
that's been approved by Department of Homeland Security. I think I've sent that information to you all previously. That's specifically meant for this type of use, and it's the only one that's been fire code vetted by the Department of Homeland Security. It's used in the court system, et cetera. So, a lock like that, a key lock doesn't do you any good because first of all, you have to have the key, and second of all, people using the capacity under stress to be able to use a key is problematic. And how was their engagement? How was their stakeholder engagement? And what kind of what level, and with whom, and when?
In terms of all these processes, Mr. Vaccarello personally met with the student representatives in terms of student engagement, and he also met with the County Council PTSAs and got their feedback. He met with administrators, the principal association groups at each of the individual levels, and each of those groups, they were asked to be ambassadors for it. And I know, and perhaps you can speak a little bit more to the student engagement piece, but there was a survey that was, I think, sent around that the students gave us really, actually, excellent quality feedback.
All right. So some of the other concerns or suggestions that I had from PTAs, PTAs had suggested that maybe they have a security group at each school, particularly the high schools, a security group that could work with the staff assessment of the building, because the parents that are at the school know the best where some of the concerns of the students are. And they said it's not just shooter technology. It's things like darkened walkways, in the winter, and, glass, broken glass, and, there's a lot of concern expressed about students being alone without an adequate number of adults on fields that didn't have easy access and didn't have security and the after school hours. So things like that were very much a concern. Another one was, and PTAs love to do it, but school swag that has lanyards with school names on it given out to teachers. Then the teachers have their ID at the end, which has a key pass. If that is lifted or stolen or lost and not reported in a timely fashion, somebody has instant access to, they know where the building is, they have the person's ID, and they have an entrance into the building. And so it may be that's a cultural thing that we've adopted to is handing out swag of lanyards with the school name, but that is a no-no in security, is putting all the pieces of the puzzle together in one place. So that was another suggestion that came. I am shocked. I'm going to say I'm shocked that I counted 8 trainers, 2 video watchers, and 18 mental health professionals. We don't have a single additional security personnel recommended, I guess. I will tell you that's the one thing I would not have expected at the end result. Even if there's money, and of course there's money associated with it. I mean, surrounding jurisdictions throughout the Commonwealth have stepped up. I mean, surrounding, close to us have stepped up and put a school resource officer or additional security personnel in each school. And I just want to say, as a parent, we have, and I won't name the school, but we had a school that had back-to-back incidents. And students told me that the first incident was in relation to a planned fire drill. The next day, there was a second incident. There were students who told me, that's it. I thought we thought this was it. Because the first one was a mishap and there was bad communication and everybody was really, kind of suffering. And then the second day in a row, kids they almost got to a resigned feeling that they were going to be shot that day. And then I have elementary schools where, if there is unexpected police activity and there's a lockdown, little children are crying in the classroom. I mean, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders are crying in the classroom. And parents aren't being told that there was a lockdown. It's a communications thing. And I guess I don't understand why something like a communications app, and maybe it's forthcoming, but something that is an instant communications plan. The back and forth between something happens at a building and then it has to go to central office and then everybody at central office talks about how it's going to be communicated and then it goes back to the school and maybe the school at some point will communicate, but who they're going to communicate isn't known. And by that time, all the students have already spread whatever, truth, half-truth, complete rumor, and the anxiety level goes up exponentially. And I would think that either a proprietary app or there's got to be a off-the-shelf, turnkey solution out there that has some pre-populated, we're aware of a threat. We're aware of a threat, we're investigating it. Parents, please feel better that we have this. Or, children are, being evacuated from the building, for a fire drill that's unexpected. Or, nothing is wrong. I mean, it's sort of the pressure cooker relief valve to take, that anxiety out of the situation that is, frankly, it's fear, and quite often it's unsubstantiated fear, but the fear is still real. And I think we have a duty on the communication side to address that, and I can't think that it would cost that much. So that becomes, to me, like one of the most significant priorities is addressing the greatest number of people in the shortest amount of time in the most effective manner to communicate what's happening. So what is happening on that communications front? Because this looks very complicated in terms of, on the back side, on the inside. I'm talking about the out to students and parents under pressure.
Ms. Schultz, you raise a lot of good points in that. And in fact, I'm going to let Mr. Guilfoyle address the Office of Communications about his RFP and the intention to be forward-leaning and making sure parents know, hey, we're aware of what's going on. We want you to know that we're aware of it, and we'll get back to you as soon as we have additional information. And then the other piece is on page 25, there are 8 different options for staffing personnel in this document. Certainly, whatever considerations this body indicates, if that's a higher priority, we serve at that pleasure. But Matt, if you wouldn't mind.
Ms. Schultz, I agree with you. I think we do need to get better at the timeliness of the notifications. I think We have relied on a somewhat distributed model where we've expected schools to send those communications. In some cases that works, in some cases it doesn't. It's been inconsistent in its delivery. So one of the things that we are working on is part of that is that training component. Part of it is a process improvement. Is there a way that for us to centrally push those messages if a school is evacuating under a unplanned circumstance? Yes, we could do that. The other thing that we're doing is that we have worked with the Fairfax County Police Department and their Public Affairs Bureau to improve, especially on lockdown situations, that henceforth, moving forward, if a lockdown, specifically lockdown situation occurs, that we will send out immediate messages saying that a lockdown has occurred. Our office oftentimes doesn't know the reason for that lockdown. So, but that regardless of us not knowing the reason, we are going to say a lockdown is occurring. And then we have collaborated with the police department that they will follow up as soon as they have the information, hopefully within minutes, to be able to say that there's a lockdown due to a suspicion of an armed intruder or some other circumstance. So we are in collaboration with the police in order to make these more timely and more effective. I do agree that we need to get better about even some of the things that raise anxiety levels, such as just a planned fire drill. And that is something that we are going to be working with Mr. Vaccarello, his office, and the principals in order to improve our processes and our procedures. I'm also conducting an internal review of my own office to make sure that we have the best possible practices in place based on industry best practices across the nation. So that is something that I'm doing as well currently.
Okay, I'm going to make 4 final points. One, as the original maker of the motion, I don't see anything in here about the administrative buildings. And I had expected that, and maybe that's forthcoming, that there would be a look at the administration buildings for the safety and security of our staff that are not in schools. 2, I think there needs to be intentional parental engagement and stakeholders, maybe even ongoing student engagement, because I'm going to tell you some of the very best suggestions that I have heard have come from the students themselves, because they're experiencing, I've only talked to high school students, but they're experiencing how we're delivering the training, the end result, and I think looking at it through their eyes will help improve our process, and so I think that should be ongoing. 3, I have been a parent in Fairfax County Public Schools of children from preschool, special ed preschool through high school, in 3 different magisterial districts, and I don't know how many different pyramids. I've never heard of parent reunion. I've never heard of a sister school. I don't know anything about it. And that's 4 different children in all those different situations. So if I don't know about it, I don't know who does, to be perfectly honest. And the last thing on the cameras, I can appreciate cameras and the affinity the school system has for them. You described it a little bit, that it potentially could locate someone, people on the ground, human intel in the form of additional security personnel, particularly for schools with large campuses. You mentioned West Potomac, Robinson, Lake Braddock as secondary schools. There's no place else where we assign a number of people to the building for students based on the building. Say, well, you get X many, teachers because you're a building. It's the number of students that drive the ratio. And for these massive campuses, or as I've said in the past, the exterior profile, a school that sits on a major roadway, a third of a mile from a tank farm, with lots of commercial industry around it, has a different exterior profile than potentially one that sits with a park and on a 2-lane road with a neighborhood across the street. And so I would think that we would need to look at resources and the attribution of security personnel. Yes, I do mean armed security personnel, or at least additional security personnel based on the population of the school and the complexity and size of the campus. I didn't see that addressed. So I don't know if these go into next steps or if there's additional things that need to be discussed. And I think this is a brilliant first first attack at this very complex issue, but I feel like this is sort of, step one in a multi-step process in moving us forward and having a greater conversation with the public about the nature and the security of our schools. And the end result, for me, I would be disappointed in anything that comes out that making our schools more secure doesn't involve one more safety and security person.
Okay, thank you. That was 18 minutes. Tammy, Megan, and then Ilya.
Thank you. Thank you all for this report. Every single community meeting that I went to, whether I was there just as a guest of the PTA or if I was doing a budget presentation, the meeting ended up turning to school security. There was never a community meeting that I attended this year in elementary, middle, or high school that didn't bring me to a barrage of questions on this area. So I thank you. I agree with my colleagues that I think this is excellent, but I do believe it's a beginning. I was a little late, so the one thing that I have to ask, Ms. Schultz referenced it, and if you did it in the early presentation, I apologize for being a little late. The cost, the 18, and you talk about a pendulum swing, somebody else had mentioned it. When I was first running for this board 7 years ago, there was a distinct cadre of parents who didn't want cameras in the school at all. I always felt that it was a thing that helped for safety and security. So I appreciate that we are going to be adding them in all schools. But when I look at the price tag, what it would cost for having SROs at elementary schools, I would just like to know why, and if you address this, I'll go back, but why that versus this?
You raise a good point. I mean, it really comes down to, you look at the funding mechanism that we identified for the cameras. It was out of capital, not operational recurring. And that is why we provided the 8 different options.
So you're saying because of the monies where we can garner these monies right now, we can take it out of capital and that can be used for a capital expenditure, whereas the monies to fund SROs would have to come from a different portion of our budget. And
yes, but it's a little more, we took the preponderance of the feedback that we got from the different stakeholders group, and I'll go back again. The social emotional was huge. The training was huge. I think that everybody here has articulated one way, shape, or form of student feedback, the eyes of people who actually received the end training and so forth. So that's where the majority of it really came down to. And then the capital piece of the cameras, the fact of the matter is it is a large dollar amount, and it is something that when you look at that, the funding vehicle for that, if I could have everything done in this document,
I understand
I'd take
that.
every bit of them. But right. I hear the struggle is the same struggle we had as staff as well, by the way.
Right. I will add, I think, and we had talked about the need, we used to have the health curriculum in the elementary schools, and we used to have the SROs, and I've told the story 1,000 times, but I will tell it again, about how when my son is now 23, had the same SRO who used to sing and play a guitar and talk about public safety, was the same SRO who then handed children their driver's license. There was a line around the building at Edison High School in order to shake hands with that officer. That is building social and emotional wealth. That is building a bank of that. So I am a huge advocate of having SROs in the building, not just at the elementary school, not just for safety and security, but for building relationships on a multitude of levels. And so I hope that as we build upon this plan, that can be the top of the next step that we do, because it is a piece that's missing. It's a piece that was taken out of the county budget, and it's a piece that I think just builds in so many ways, safety, security, as well as personal relationships of children, and not fearing police officers, seeing them as a trusted adult that they can work with. So that's that one. Also have experienced talking about, I'm thrilled that we are adding 18 mental health individuals. I think that's excellent, and I know that I've heard a lot, particularly, again, you may not hear about it at high school, but there's the fear there too. But parents are, and because kids are not, I haven't had some of the town halls that some of my colleagues have had, so mine is more anecdotal hearing from high school kids. But most of my meetings that I referenced earlier, my community meetings where I was at elementary or middle schools for some of these things, the parents were very vocal about the stress their children were hearing. So were feeling and frightened. So I guess, Ms. Panarelli, Dr. Panarelli, this is for you. These mental health individuals, will there be some kind of programming to kind of, first of all, make sure parents know that there's availability if their child is frightened because of these drills? Or else is there going to be an element put into these drills? Because I think some teachers, you look at a young person coming out of college, a young teacher, they may not have been trained on how to handle all of these things that these young children are feeling, because this is a real life-threatening situation. I mean, I know fire drills are too, but this is a different thing because, it's on the news. It's everywhere we look.
I would say at this point we have not been as proactive with that as we could be. We have certainly seen kids who, following a drill, have needed some additional support, and they've been sent to the counselor, the psychologist, the social worker. High school kids will say, I need to go and talk to somebody. With the elementary kids, often their teacher is the one who is sort of most comforting to them anyhow, and I don't think we've done enough to sort of help teachers have a script or a protocol that would help them. So that's an area where we can definitely improve.
Would that be able to happen in this plan, do you think?
Yes, I do think that it will be part of training, and also, again, the reason we decided to try to focus the positions at the middle school level is that currently most of our middle schools only have somebody there 2 days a week, 2.5 days a week, and they're pretty large buildings, and they are, if bullying is going to occur, middle schools are very frequently the place that it happens. There's just a lot of emotional turmoil in a middle school, and we were looking for something that we could really increase our support at that level. So I think we would not expect these people to be the only people who would be working proactively with schools around what kind of things might be said and supports offered to kids as they do these drills, because we would need that at every school. It would really be more a matter of a training for our psychologists and social workers across the board.
Okay. Mr. Guilford, I thank you for outlining the communications plan. I think I have also heard, of a desire from parents to be part of this, making sure that through their, I think the PTA is the vehicle, but I think as we do this, I appreciate how you outlined what is going to happen, but I just need a little bit more clarity. So there is an event at the school. How does that line of communication between the police and our system work? I know we have our SRO officers as part of your office, but can you just outline that a little bit more?
They're actually not part of my office, they're actually part of Mr. Vaccarello's office. So maybe it might be best, though, because Tom is the primary contact between the police and the school system. So let me ask Tom, and I can fill in if necessary.
Because I think that's an important piece for our board and the community to understand. And then I guess I would ask, do you think there are any ways to improve communication on that level?
So thanks for the question. Yeah, so in the Office of Safety and Security, primarily we're involved with that communication. It gets first responders to an event, that alerts people immediately to go to event to help, assist, first aid, whatever it may be, guidance. We do have communications in place. Whenever we get something from the police, primarily I'll get a call, or our central office will get a call saying, here's what we have at a particular building. That information is given to OCCR. But OSS stays in its communication with 911 lanes of making sure the emergency is well taken care of. Outside of that lane, as we talk about, how do we get this word to parents now? What's a better way to do that? that gets turned over as we're working in collaboration with Matt's office now to how do we do that better? How do we inform teachers so that the principal doesn't have to sit up in the middle of a crisis, send out a KIT message? How do we do that better?
Right. So that's a change. That's a change. Your office will now centrally be sending out that information.
We've discussed it for lockdowns. For lockdowns only at this point, we are looking at the other events that require communication. The challenge is simply one of logistics and working through that, and it's something we have been discussing, and we're working through what's a better way to do that. It's simply, the challenge is the volume. Every day we have lots of, and I don't want to call them incidents, but there's everything from a routine fire drill to secure the building. And it's looking at that business practice. Is it better for all of those things that may be happening at a school? The school's going to know best what's happening at the school. Is it better for the school to communicate that, or is it better for our office to communicate that? And sometimes there's a lag. If the school has to feel like they've got to contact the central office to send it out or to wait for us to send it out. So we're going to work through that, and we're going to improve that practice. The number one, though, is that for lockdowns, which is our most severe circumstance, those will be handled by our office, who will immediately communicate that once we've gotten notification from the police department.
All right. I think it's important once you work through that plan, that if that's the next step, if we can make sure that this board hears that and we work through it, because that's a question that we often get in the community, and it's something that we really need to understand.
Sure.
And finally, let me see if there's anything else. I do think that Ms. Corbett-Sanders and I had met with Delegates Krezek, Sickles, and Watts earlier this summer, and we haven't had a lot of communication back so much from what that was a state delegation for safety. I think as a board we need to make certain that, because of what's happening out there, that should be part of our legislative plan. This, the fact, Dr. Brabrand, I forgot about that social workers and our social workers and what else are not even psychologists.
Social workers and psychologists. I was on Governor McDonnell's. Yes. After Sandy Hook, I was on Governor McDonnell's as the sole superintendent. I told them then, you're not putting this in. You're asking schools to do threat assessments. Who's going to be at the threat assessment table?
Right.
We're lucky in Fairfax to have the professionals around the table that we do. We still have some schools that are being asked to do stuff with teams and don't have the team members to do it. So it is definitely one of the state issues. I feel the same way, frankly, about state camera grants. There's been equipment grants. I asked Jeff Plattenberg about it when I first got here, how to get dollars for cameras, because we did, and he laughed at me like it's throwing us a penny, throwing us 2 or 3 cents for Fairfax County. Oh yeah, you want a camera? Here's $50. I mean, it's expensive to do cameras, so the state could really step up in helping us on the SOQ for social emotional supports and for cameras.
And for cameras, so then we don't have to pick between cameras and safety and security people in our elementary schools, which is what we're doing now. So I think that as a next step, we have to also put that as part of our ensuring that we work that into our legislative packet in the fall.
Okay, great. That was 13 minutes. Next we have Megan, Ilyang, and then I will take a turn.
Great. First of all, I do like the idea that was suggested that we have some sort of communications app or the app that we have for FCPS, that we look at expanding on that ability so we can communicate more with parents, especially in these circumstances. I do think that we need to spend a little more time figuring out how to communicate out to our families when these lockdown drills are happening, because especially the younger the age of the student, the trauma and the fear that gets generated from those, parents need to know that took place and check in with kids, because they may not even know how to verbalize and explain what was upsetting to them. So I appreciate my colleagues who brought that up so far. The other thing is that that was brought up by Niharika and Ms. Schultz and others, that certainly I heard and actually asked some of our firemen here in the county, as I said, why are we doing 12 fire drills a year and we do 4 of the active shooters? Now, I will tell you all, it gives me pause because these lockdown drills I have heard are traumatizing to kids. So I want to be clear that I'm not necessarily saying, oh, let's just, pile on more drills, and especially because I do think that there's a whole nother level of anxiety there. But I would ask that Tom shop with Jeff, Scott, that theirs needs to be probably a deeper conversation than obviously the timed work session that Mr. McElveen's doing a very good job of trying to keep us on pace too. We need to have a deeper conversation on that, and I would look to our social workers and psychologists as part of the staff to help that conversation. What's the cost benefit for doing those? Is that something that you all have been wrestling with at all? Because by state law, is there a best practice that why we're doing 12? You mentioned the state law, but do we just keep doing it?
They're excellent points, but if you keep in mind, there was something that happened in another state close by quite a while ago where doors were locked by the staff that worked there with a chain, and people weren't able to get out of that situation. So, those reasons why it's usually cause and effect, reactive.
Sure. No, what I'm saying is, obviously, number one, we do and must follow the law. So I'm not saying we wouldn't follow the law. I'm just saying, is it possible that we need to have an updated conversation with fire and safety to say, is that an outmoded law to do it 12 times in a school year?
We can talk to the county executive about that. I don't support doing more lockdown drills right now than what we do. What I feel we need to be doing is changing the context of what those drills are. Not the same period, not just in a classroom. It's getting people in these different scenarios that we need. The debrief that Marty talked about, both in some cases before and sometimes after, not just with kids, but even with our community. We've not done as good a job explaining the security piece to our community. And then when we've had security issues, anxiety around the nation, anxiety has lifted, and then something happens here, and we've not been quick enough for where our community is to get the response that they're expecting. That's one of the biggest nuggets. And as you already heard, Mr. Guilfoyle's doing a complete review, and on the lockdown, which we know is the biggest anxiety thing, we're going to take that over. And really, in one way, a principal's trying to do 1,000 things in the middle of the incident, not worry about how to message out the message, and we're going to get a better.
I completely 100% agree, and that's why we have regional superintendents. The regional superintendents should be able to take that piece off the principal's plate, and I know they're communicating with their regional superintendent. So when we had an incident at Woodson, Dr. Ivy was able to communicate with me since I live right near the school, and there's fire engines going off like crazy, but my son's there. Yep. So I'm thinking, what is going on over at Woodson? But that, for a lot of families, was, oh my gosh.
Yep. We're reviewing those protocols, and we'll have something in place for next year.
The other thing is, I noticed in the report that for grade level scripts, that was a 1 to 3 year estimated time. I would ask that get closer to a year. That if we're going to have, standardized grade level scripts, that should not take us 3 years to have that done. And the reason I bring this up is because one parent who reached out to me in my district was quite upset because her child's in elementary school, quite young, and the teacher, out of sensitivity, did their lockdown drill, but the language that used was, there's a large animal in the building. And the parent is again very nervous about everything post Parkland, and she said, what is that going to do to help my child? Because then when there is a lockdown drill, and it's because there's a shooter, and she might be on the playground with a different teacher, and they say it's a shooter, and my child's going to say, well, I only know what to do when there's a large animal in the building. So I completely appreciate where that individual teacher might have been with wanting to not traumatize children. It's sad we live in a world that's having to happen, but that's an example of standardized terminology and scripts that I obviously would like us to see get quicker to that issue so that doesn't happen. In terms of the tabletop exercises, I appreciate that I was looking through the report, and I started reading narrative before I saw terminology. But I would just say on page 8, if you guys could go back to that section as staff, where you have all of those orientations, drills, tabletop exercise especially, it's really kind of unclear. Who's doing the tabletop? What exactly does that mean? What part involves? Like, I would look at this and try to delineate a little more clearly what staff does and which staff. Like, is it staff and which staff? Is it students, teachers? And then that way people have a clear framework of understanding at each level what that means. That just was kind of feedback for clarity of the report. And then Dr. Brabrand, one of the reasons I was pushing the school nurses comment to you while you were trying to talk about social workers and psychologists, the board and many in the public know that I'm a social worker, and I'm a huge proponent of strengthening our numbers, and it upsets me that we haven't been able to get them into the SOQs along with our psychologists and our school nurses. But one of the things that I've heard feedback is that because we are understaffed in social workers and psychologists, they are overwhelmed with the responsibilities of IEPs, 504 meetings. They're just not able to spend time in the classroom, in the hallways, developing the relationships and becoming a known entity in our buildings. And yet, when we talk about beefing up mental health experts, especially at the high school level, middle school level, we need kids to know who those people are. And so if we're going to add that additional staffing, that is certainly a possibility, but we've got to raise their profile. One reason I want everyone here to just be thinking about our school nurses is there is less stigma going to a school nurse, because sadly still in our society, physical health is not stigmatizing, mental health can be. So kids they typically know where the school nurse is, but as we all know, we don't have school nurses except more consistently in our high schools. They visit our elementary and middle schools, but we have clinic aides, and they're not trained like a registered nurse. And so it's very different. So on offline and a different environment, I'll be talking a little bit more about that. But I guess I would just say that I wholeheartedly support beefing up mental health supports in our building, because it's not just about handling the trauma or the fear and all that stuff. We've got to have staff in the building beyond our very busy guidance counselors, where kids will say, I'm seeing a warning sign about this kid. And we heard that in Parkland, and we heard it about most school shooters, that kids are seeing it. And so the more we can raise their profile, the better. Maybe in the beginning of the school year, we have our social workers, we just figure out with our improved staffing, getting them in front of kids and people know who they are. And this goes to the SRO piece, and this is the last thing, Mr. McElveen, I wanted to make sure I could cover. I have deep respect for the partnership we have with our SROs. And with two of them sitting here in the room, I want to make sure that they understand. I also worry at times that we want to ensure that our SROs are working to build those community relationships, but that it's not about, just looking to catch kids and prosecuting. And that's that. I know you're not. But we've got almost 50 SROs in our buildings, and just like there's in any profession, people come at it with different mindsets. Some SROs are totally there for community building. Others are being utilized by our buildings as, how are we, catching kids doing things and referring them as much as possible back into the juvenile court system. And so that's something we're just wanting to work on as a county. And even if that's perception versus reality, that's something that we also need to be working on. So I preface this because some people were saying to me, all right, after Parkland, I feel like my elementary school children are vulnerable. I mean, if a shooter gets in a building, you've got an SRO who can, and we've been hearing the heroism that they're there and they're shutting down that shooter a lot faster than a shooter gets into an elementary school building, and how fast can you have someone who is armed and able to help? And I'm giving staff and you feedback that this report is completely inadequate in answering that question. It just says it's a recommendation and we're not doing it. And that's going to be a problem. I will tell you now, in my district, they're going to see this report and people are going to be mad at me. They're going to say, we waited months since Parkland, and there's nothing in here, Megan, that explains why we're not going to have SROs in elementary schools. So if staff did the analysis and said, we don't at this time think we should have them, I very much appreciate that the analysis was done. It's got to be captured in this report. So in terms of a next step, I will say if that doesn't get delineated in the narrative, be prepared that the public backlash on this report will be one of the key things they wanted to understand was that piece to it. So my question is, do we know of any other Virginia school districts that have SROs at the elementary school level? And if we do, we should put that into the report and why we think we're going to be different. I'm asking staff.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and duly note that and the revisions and the next steps that you mentioned, because there are some that have just recently taken action, and I know a neighboring district has a shared one like we used to have. So yeah, we'll include that in the next steps.
But just for those who are watching this work session, what is the primary rationale from your analysis that you don't recommend to this board at this time that we have elementary SROs?
Well, there's no, again, I said at the beginning, if I can have everything that's in here, which includes a number of different staffing options, but I think the conversation is deeper in terms of the relationship with the county and the schools, because if you keep in mind, we in Fairfax County had a shared SRO at the elementary level, and that was a very successful program. People talking, there were references that were given by other board members here this afternoon. So, certainly we take that very seriously, and we think that would be a deeper conversation between board members and the leadership on both the county and school side. Certainly I've definitely heard the feedback today.
Yeah, because what I heard from people say is obviously if safety and security is one of the most important things we do, and we have a $3 billion budget, but we end up saying we can't afford to have what in some people's eyes is, from a public perception is, we're shortchanging the safety and security of our kids. And obviously that's a very real fear and frustration. I had one parent who said, you're so cheap that you would risk the life of even a single child to not have an SRO in the elementary school. She said FCPS and the school board. And I just said, I really hope you know that would never be the case, but we want to be, we're trying to make the best decisions possible. And yes, within a fiscal reality, I do think that the board of supervisors absolutely have to be a big piece of this conversation. If our staff deems that from a safety and security best practice, we need the SROs in our elementary school building, everyone around this table, we cannot have it be about money. That has to be going to the board of supervisors and saying, this was deemed essential, and now we're going to have the public dialogue that this is an expense we have to pay for. Does that make sense?
Listen, we had the discussion. We didn't have consensus that was what we wanted to bring forward.
That's okay.
That's the reality.
Right. Yeah.
We know that years ago that there was a county aspect to it. We debated whether that would be using the county resources. Would we want our own resources, our own folks, whether our own folks would be armed or unarmed? No, but you're getting to, we put it all on the table. What we wanted to bring forward is what we felt were our recommended best practices for this coming year. And that's the balance, but it's certainly an appropriate conversation to have. I will say nothing on here, not what we recommended, not that what we reviewed but did not recommend, is a silver bullet that will protect our children no matter what. There was an SRO in that school in Parkland. It didn't give that school elimination from the tragedy that happened. So we've got to just be careful in our language on all this. What can we do to continue to enhance safety and security in our system? And it's a balanced conversation, and we had some tough discussions. We brought you, after 3 months of intensive review, what we think is the best set of next steps for Fairfax County Schools. But we know, as some of you already said, the conversation can continue, both feedback on what we put and other things that we reviewed and want to discuss but did not recommend and want to discuss in greater detail with you, with the community, with our county.
Well, I will just reiterate, because I think it was heard and I appreciate it. If this report does not go into detail about why you've determined not to recommend elementary school SROs, there will be a backlash on the report. And so since you spent a lot of time deliberating it, I look forward to it being here so we can communicate that piece. And the other thing I would just say is, with every individual school shooting, there's going to be so many different factors that happen. To my knowledge, there was another recent shooting where the SRO actually was extremely essential and stepping in very quickly. So parkland in isolation isn't necessarily going to say that it won't help reduce the loss of life. I really appreciate Ms. Koufax. One of the most important messages about SROs, which is building those relationships. I'm a big believer in community policing. My brother-in-law has done the research at the criminal justice level for universities. We know building positive relationships, and especially at an early age for children, with police officers is a win-win for our community. So thank you, and Mr. McElveen, I'm cringing to think what the time is going to be.
Mr. McElveen, if I could just real quick, we are reviewing the SRO MOU for our existing SROs. We're doing that in collaboration with the county. I think it's important to get that right before we're adding more SROs into our schools. And I'm going to just say this to the board, but to the whole community. I want to be a superintendent that backlash is not the language we use for any of the decisions we're going to make. I don't want to backlash any parents, any teachers, any students. I want people to think we're reasonable people who come together. Sometimes we're going to differ. What's the best approach to make our school system the best it can be, including safety and security? And I know that's not what you're suggesting.
No,
but
what I'm saying is in the absence of information. You've got to provide the information, or the public
provide the
can't.
information, but our hearts and minds are wide open to try to do what's best for kids. And we brought that in that spirit for all these recommendations before you.
Okay, great. Only 19 minutes. We have Mr. Moon, then me, and then we're going to try and wrap up. For those here for the calendar discussion at 1, I'm going to go ahead and say that we're going to start that at 1:40, so we still have some time to wrap up this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McElveen. I'll try to do it within less than 5 minutes. And I know that we have some go-backs as well with Ms. Evans. I saw her name. I'm going to start with SRO. I appreciate what our superintendent has said, that we are trying to engage in conversation with the county on existing MOU first. Fully understand that. However, I don't want to discount the importance of having a further discussion with the county on potential needs for SRO at the elementary schools. The $18 million, that's a large number, even when you have $3 billion school systems budget, and also, there's another, $2 billion on the county side as well. But always deal with a very tight budget situation on both sides. $18 billion is a large number. And I assume that the $18 billion accounts for basically one SRO for each elementary school, which is about 150. Is that the number?
That's correct. It's an estimate, obviously.
But that's for elementary school. Even if we're not talking about 450 additional SROs to be funded by, hopefully the county side rather than us, because again, we depend upon county funding us on all our needs. But if we could start having some discussion with the county, I think it will be incumbent upon our board to indicate to the County Board of Supervisors that we support to having that discussion, whether it's 150 SROs or end up being, sharing, one SRO amongst number of elementary schools. It could be 20% of that, could it be half of that, but I think we should engage in discussion with the county. And I would like to have, my colleagues' support on that, so that we could give a directive to the superintendent to contact county executive that the board, school board, wants to have some discussion about this with the County Board of Supervisors. On the since the staff is looking for some guidance from the school board on the prioritization and implementation of your recommendations, I'm going to get to that. I generally support your recommendations, but I have a few questions and I have a comment. On one major piece is the $20 million piece on cameras. That's a large number. When this board, I was a supporter of this board requesting for additional capital funding from the County Board of Supervisors. I didn't anticipate spending a large part of that to go toward the cameras rather than eliminate, building new schools and expediting the renovation of the schools, and also, hopefully being able to eliminate close to 9,000 trailers that we are using. So I will have, unless I see a detailed plan, how that $20 million in is gonna affect our CIP. With the $20 million, you are thinking that they should be spent year number one. As soon as we get additional $25 million from the county, we're gonna put 20 over 25 to that, or you are anticipating that we put in additional money as we renovate, build the new schools, and which is a long-term plan. I mean, I want to have a little more detail and have a discussion before I give either my blessings or my lack of pleasure to staff or my colleagues on the board. And other items, I do have a question to staff about the funding source. I do understand about year-end one-time funds for dual key interior class door locks. Year-end, I get that. What I can guess what this means. FY19 revised budget for other funding source for other items. Is that revised budget because those are recurring costs, or are you looking into potentially school board redoing the budget we had adopted just a couple of weeks ago? Some of the items being moved around. Is that what you're looking for? Or is this is going to come at the year-end budget, but since these are recurring costs, you consider that to be revised FY19 budget? I mean, I'm looking at our CFO.
Yeah, the revised budget just generally means the fiscal 19 adopted budget plus any changes that have occurred since then, like a budget transfer or a budget adjustment. This would also include changes in revenue that we will provide to you all as part of year-end. As you know, we're expecting $3.4 million in additional state revenue, and so that is a change that we will put forward to you all on July 12th.
I guess what I was trying to understand was the distinction between year-end one-time fund versus FY19 revised budget as a source of funding. I was basically talking about the same thing, year-end adjusting with the budget we have just adopted.
Yes and no.
Okay.
It's the revised budget, so anything coming forward out of fiscal 18 year-end would also be part of the fiscal 19 revised budget as being a change to the budget.
I need to engage in offline discussion since I'm trying to honor Mr. McGovern's request to do my portion within 5 minutes. Yes.
And what I can say is that we've identified that funding source as the revised budget because, again, it is would be a recurring cost. Okay. So that would be something that would be built into the base outside of.
That was what I thought, recurring versus one-time funding. But we can have further conversation on that. With that, again, as a one board member, my guidance to the staff is supporting these recommendations, except for $20 million. That's way too big for me to say yes or no right at this point. And we don't have to decide that today. But since we have a year-end budget review coming up in the second meeting in July, our board will need to give us some clearer guidance to the staff as how they going to recommend year-end budget review. And also ask my colleagues support and asking superintendent start engaging, start, discussing with the county executive, at least forwarding to us county executive or these boards, desire to have some conversation about SROs at elementary schools.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. 6 minutes. And so I am going to hopefully do my piece quickly now. First of all, I'm glad to see in their proposal there was nothing about arming staff or using magnetometers. I think we have to be, there's a fine line between militarizing our schools and, keeping them the communities that we want them to be. I do agree with my colleagues on the SRO piece. I would prefer to see money go to that before it went to cameras if there's a choice. But at the same time, I do think both are important. And I will tell Mr. Moon that's why I advocated for even more capital funding than that initial 25 million. A couple questions that I want to raise that haven't been discussed yet are there was discussion about in the report about the delay we have in our alarm systems and the fact that at the high school we have a 3-minute delay, and elementary and middle there's no delay. That seems like a no-cost thing to implement. So I'd be curious as to why we have the delay for high school and not for middle and elementary.
Well, it really started out with the frequency of the responses that we had from the fire department and the requests in our conversations back in the day of how frequently they responded to the high schools. So we asked for that delay. Actually, they kind of asked for that delay, and it was kind of a partnership on it. But we certainly can have those conversations. We just wanted to lay it out that that's something that we thought was an opportunity.
Okay. And then another question I had is one of the things that I had thought we had already done as a system was to fortify the glass, at least in the main entrances, and look to doing that more throughout the schools. And in the report, one of the recommendations not adopted was the security film for both classroom doors and for those front entrances. So what brought you to the conclusion that would not be necessary at this point?
Well, again, it's not a matter of what's not necessary at this point. It really was just taking a look at what the preponderance of the information, the feedback that we've received from all partners. Again, like some of the conversation here today, we're getting a little bit more focus on one aspect, the SRO partnership with the county and so forth. It's just a matter of which ones were the most frequent and the most common.
And do we have any schools with the fortified glass?
I'm going to take that as a follow-up for the next steps, because when you brought this up to begin with, I wanted to make sure we clarified what we did, because we did do something.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is, and I need to get with Mr. Sneed about that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, with that was 3 minutes. I will, we do have 2 very quick go-backs. Please do them within 1 minute and 30 seconds, both Sandy and Dahlia.
Thank you. First, I want to say I think this has been a really great discussion. Everybody has had excellent questions and ideas. So 2 points I wanted to add. One, Dr. Brabrand mentioned about the grants. I do think that's, I have gotten a couple of things about new money coming out both at the federal level and the state. At the federal level, it sounds like it's $50 million for the entire country, so that's not much. But I don't know why we wouldn't pursue it, as well as state grants. That I think Glasgow recently got exterior cameras through a state grant, so I would welcome that as a source of funding. The other piece, though, on the cameras, those of us who were on the board, as Mrs. Strauss and Ms. Dayanek Koufax mentioned, that was at the time controversial, and I just looked up the policy. That was something that we approved in December of 2011. It does have very specific requirements about engaging the public ahead of time. So do we have a plan, or are you waiting for the board to express its views on this? Because it asks the principal at every single school to engage the public on it before we do anything, and also has restrictions on where the cameras can go, not in any classrooms, for example. Were you anticipating any cameras in classrooms or no?
Nope.
Okay. So I think that's just something that we have to take into account, that is required, at least under current policy and current reg, that we
Yes.
engage ahead of time.
And Sandy, I think you're exactly right. Our spirit was we wanted to bring this to you, and we were aware of that regulation or that policy, and whether the board, depending on their interests in the camera recommendation, whether we would want to change the policy or leave the policy as is, determining how we would want to move forward if the camera piece was adopted.
Okay. And then lastly, if it's available, I'd like to see the SRO MOU. If we haven't already, maybe we okay. If it's available, I'd like to see it.
Okay, Dahlia.
Thank you. Very quick go backs. Number one, discussing, access to schools and SROs. Something I had heard from some of our local police officers was the discussion over them being able to access the doors in the schools. Has that been resolved? And I'll let you answer that quickly if you can.
Yeah, so we have actually a particular project now that's providing keys to officers that are not only SROs, obviously, but every station would have a key to them.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I know while we're having this longer conversation that immediate access. And the second one, I don't know if we'll discuss this in the follow-up, but Ms. Corbett Sanders brought to my attention that the VSBA Legislative Committee meeting is July 11th. So as we're having these conversations about getting the additional funding both for staffing and for the cameras, I hope that we can engage Mr. McElveen, Mr. Malloy to do something for that meeting and not just wait until the fall to have that discussion.
And just to answer that one, the deadline for submissions was several weeks ago, but I think Mr. Malloy will be attending in the audience, and it's possible we can engage some people there.
And we had something submitted, so maybe just if we can discuss that.
Okay, great. So let's turn turn to next steps. The one thing we had hoped to come out of this conversation with was concurrence on some of these things through year-end funding. Based on discussion, I would say I think there's support for everything except the cameras at this point, and that's obviously that would be a discussion for the CIP, right? Going into next year, is that
exactly
right?
Yes.
So at this point, we don't have to address that. But so let's.
Can I ask? Was
Sure.
there any attempt to cost out a communications application like a?
I don't think. Did we get to that? We didn't get a
for-
chance to do that, did we?
So we have a.
Because I know other states. I mean, I know Florida. This is in practice, so I don't know if this was costed. And I got to imagine on the return on investment, something that could communicate with 250,000 people, whatever the cost would be, that may be the cheapest return on investment we can make.
So what I'd like to offer is that, one, we are moving to a new tool for our alerting messaging. That was a long time competitive procurement that will be implemented in the next 6 months or so. As part of the review that I'm conducting with our overall communication practices, what I'd like to do is complete that first to make sure that we know what our business practice is before we go and buy a tool to match that business practice. And then we could come back with recommendations if we believe a tool is better suited, or if maybe we can just address this through improved business practice.
Okay, so let me just do this before we do next steps. So you saw the chart up there originally that had the 3 sections of recommendations, right? So there was the training, the security, and the mental health, and so that staff was looking at adding positions and one-time year funding for the locks. So that will come to the board when we do our budget adoption, but I just want to see concurrence from the board that is a good baseline to start
Could we
from.
pull that up?
Yeah, can we, sorry to make you do this.
I think that I had part of that next step, if we could have a report on what the delta is between those that need the lock, as opposed to just doing it on a replacement basis.
Right.
What's the baseline? What are the number of locks out there that need, and what can we do with that approved
So I think
lock?
we'd ask staff to bring that to us before we actually voted on anything at the board table. So where did that go? Okay, so essentially we're looking just for concurrence as a baseline for staff to work with on everything up here except the CCTV cameras. just take a minute to look at that, and if we can get just a concurrence to move forward at the
And did
staff
we get an
level.
answer about where those 18 positions are?
The psychology and social work positions will primarily enhance staffing at middle school. Right, where they currently don't have either a full-time psychologist or a social worker. So at the end of the day, every middle school will have either a full-time psychologist or social worker in addition to their regular staffing for the opposite position. Because all high schools now have full-time people. Middle schools.
What about secondary schools?
Secondary schools will be part of the middle school mix. So we were considering the middle school section of the secondary school as another middle school. Yeah.
But we don't know where those 18 are. We don't.
There'll be portions of a position to round up to get a full-time person.
Okay, so do we see board concurrence? Can I get a show of hands just to move forward? This all will come back to the board at another point.
This is minus the camera piece?
Correct, minus the camera piece.
Telling people want to know.
Okay, so we're just trying to get concurrence for staff to move forward as they develop the next year's budget and the year-end budget review to move forward with these pieces. Obviously, they will come before the board again for a formal vote. But this is just for staff to build this in.
And the $20 million would not be part of the year-end budget review. So if we can get some direction on how we build that year-end review, we will add this information into that year-end review, and then the board will have an opportunity to vote at that second meeting in July.
I think that unless there is some kind of continued engagement with the public, it's got to be a part of this. I mean, for us to just plunge ahead and we've never taken this to the public, I think that's got to be a part of this.
May I respond to that? That staff superintendent is going to develop as a new business item for the year-end budget review, which will be voted on by this board, as we have always done in the second meeting in July. So we generally want to post the new business at the first meeting in July, and then public will have an opportunity at least to react to that. Meanwhile, I do not know whether this board as a collective body will have an opportunity to engage on those items before we.
Why not at least schedule a public hearing? So that because I think the public's going to have questions about this. I mean,
you could certainly suggest that, but that is my response, partial response to that.
Okay, Megan?
I think my only concern is I heard us all speaking to the $2.3 million for the mental health supports. I don't feel like I have enough information right now about 8 new positions at $800,000. I don't understand, like, what's the job title, job description, what they're going to be doing. I mean, those are 8 positions that we need to be figuring out. How do we staff 8 more teachers in a classroom versus this work that's being done here? So I don't discount that Jeff and his team haven't said this is something we feel we need, but I feel like I just don't understand who these people, their job, what their job description is, I can see a listing of some things they'll do, but if we don't fund those 8 positions, then what? It just takes longer to do the tabletop exercises and training. I mean, like, I just think cost benefit.
Absolutely. We could do that as a next step, but the reality is when it was articulated the desire to have that training done each year versus every 3 years, and the level of training that's done all the way down to the student feedback, to the review analysis, to identifying what everybody needs to do, that's what those training positions were to be for. But we can include it as a next step.
Mr. Vaccarello, can you just tell us how you envision, what do these 8 people do on a regular basis going forward?
3 of the people are just devoted to training. We're talking about this new training paradigm that we're going to put out to students and staff, and every year to do that. We need to put that out annually, not just a one-time thing. The remaining 5 positions are in fact strictly for the numbers with tabletops. So today, I have 2 people that do 80 tabletops annually. So if we add 80 each, if we add 160, let's say, if we do the simple math, I need another 6 people to do that.
Okay, so over the next month, we're going to have an opportunity to engage with staff. We'll have an opportunity at the board table to make amendments or to adjust as necessary. But I think to begin the community conversation, this can be put out there, and then we can look at having a public hearing and things like that as next steps.
Yeah,
So-
I do appreciate what you're saying. I will just put out there that we as a division have also said how committed we are to equity and diversity training. And what do we still have? How many people that are devoted to training our 28,000 full-time employees? So I'm just wanting everybody to have some little context here that the tabletop exercises are important, but every position draws from somewhere. And that's the part that I think maybe we need the deeper discussion of understanding what is most critical and essential to our operations. And I feel like in this truncated 2-hour conversation, I can't arrive at that decision. So I be forewarned, if this is going to be the proposal coming forward, I hope everybody knows that the 12 of us can have some pretty serious conversations about $800,000.
Right. Yeah, please keep it quick. This is, we're trying to move on, so yeah.
I get it. I read this as a report. I did not think we were voting to approve these expenditures today. Is that what
We are not voting to approve anything. We're asking staff to come forward with.
Karen, what saying though is if we signal today that sure, go ahead and put that up, it now takes 7 or more board members to vote out the funding of those 8 positions to vote it in. And I'm a little bit more of why not make that the amendment to vote it in, and why aren't we just going with the $2.3 million for the mental health where people had clarity and understanding? That's something to think about, because I didn't hear 7+ people say let's fund those 8 positions right now.
Well, we haven't gotten board's consensus because people.
Well, I guess that's where my clarification. When in my comments, I said I'm looking forward to this conversation continuing. That's kind of where I am. I think this is a great start. I think that we brought forth a number of questions, but that doesn't say to me full speed ahead or. I mean, because it does have to be contextual. So I guess unless somebody wants to provide, if I'm misunderstanding it, please tell me. But I'm. Yeah.
Okay, Mrs. Case Camara. Generally, superintendents comes with the recommendations for the year-end budget review. He's just seeking an input from board as he develops that. And so he's seeking an input from us that whether we believe that should be included in his recommendation on year-end budget review, which will be ultimately decided by this board after hearing from public. That is all. So if we don't give any guidance to superintendent, so he can do whatever he wants.
Is Ms. McLaughlin's characterization of where we are, is that correct?
If he puts in, then somebody has to remove that. If he doesn't put in, somebody have to put that in. So either way, so he's just seeking an input from us. So board is not making a final decision. Board, he wants to hear from us.
I was looking forward to continuing this discussion.
This is creating the action item for a future new business and then a subsequent action. That's what we're attempting to do right now.
Yes.
May I suggest perhaps to our meeting managers that we take these one by one, perhaps rather than an aggregate, because your first proposal was everything but the cameras. So
correct. Maybe that's fine. We can do it that way. So
and then see where people are.
Okay, so let's look at the training piece to start with. So this would be the 8 positions. All those who would concur with this being brought forward as part of the superintendent's recommendation. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. The security piece, and this is just the door locks piece. So this would be the $1 million to bring forward to the board. All those in favor of that? Yes, that has unanimous support. And then the mental health piece, which is the 18 positions. That's the camera. That's the CC. We aren't touching the CCTV camera right now. That's for later discussion.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that, but I thought
We did that. No.
that's only if they get.
That's only the cameras. Okay. Correct. Yes. Okay. So now just the last mental health piece, the 18 positions. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sternak Kofax, for that suggestion. That got us through it. Okay. So now let's look at the next steps. Okay. 1, provide more information regarding the determined effects of cameras, particularly if there were cameras at schools where there was an incident and if they had an impact in aiding law enforcement. Fine with that?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor of that one? Okay. Number 2, ensure training drills for students include what to do when changing classes, going in and out of trailers, and can changes be made in the short term?
I would also add during lunch as well. During lunch and recess as well.
Yeah.
Could we also add in the morning and in the afternoon while students are getting on and off
Dismissal
buses?
and arrival.
Right. Good add.
Suggest that Mrs. Schultz's recommendation of the drills occurring at different periods on different days be added into that as well, and then we have a comprehensive.
Sure.
Yeah. I just think it's easier if we have a comprehensive recommendation on that area.
Sure. Okay, so number 3 can be deleted now, right?
Correct, but we
can-
need to add Mrs. Schultz to the.
Well, the names don't go on these.
I know, but
They
they
get
do.
removed.
But
Okay, so all those in favor of number 2? Okay, that's enough. Number 3, provide the delta on the number of locks needed if current or new. All those in favor of that? Okay, that's enough. Provide talking points on best practices currently used in schools, improvements planned, and recommendations to parents. Is that okay? Okay, all those in favor of that? Okay. Provide recommendation on implementing annual security assessment of each school in addition to current annual security inspection.
I'm sorry,
I'd like
didn't Mr. Vaccarello already say, can I have clarity? Because I thought that's something you said you already do.
no.
So we do a safety inspection every year at all schools. It's around safety and security. We do not do an individual threat assessment on a property. From time to time, we do based on an incident or a request from a principal on the situation.
And I would like that to include an annual threat assessment based on the location of the school, the type of campus that it is, whether it's a single building, multiple buildings, multiple doors, and its location being close to, this is what.
So can I just get a clarity on what you're asking? Are you asking them to recommend which schools they should do it on, or are you asking for every school to have it annually?
I would actually suggest that threat assessments should be part of our basic annual getting ready to go back to school. And, well, but you have SROs in buildings, you have principals. So if there are things that are, okay, maybe you want an extenuating circumstance, but my big concern is certain schools are more at risk. And the second piece of it is that we currently have a security formula that is based on the level of the school rather than necessarily where the school's located, the number of students in the school, and the type of building it is.
If I could to help on this, it says provide a recommendation on implementing an annual. We can give feedback whether it would be annual, whether we would need something else based on resources.
Because I don't have the subject matter expertise to know if what you're asking for is needed.
So that's why I'm asking them to make the recommendation.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay. Next is ensure parental notification on lockdowns include the reason. Seems pretty simple. Is that all those in favor?
Can we just have where possible? It's possible sometimes, as Matt had shared, that when we first come out, we're not going to know the reason.
Sure.
Just
Okay. Next, incorporate run, hide, fight information. Did you also want to have Alice in there in recommendation?
You can even say options-based solutions.
Sure. Okay.
Wait, where is she asking that for?
7 in the report.
Oh.
Okay. All those in favor of that? Okay. Include requests for additional mental health support and additional security measures in next legislative priorities. All those in favor of that? Okay. Consider establishing safety committee group at each school. Is that correct?
I mean work with the PTAs, because the PTAs were the ones that were asking for it. They say we know best, and we'd like to work with the security personnel to be able to provide input. So it may be working with FCC PTA and the PTAs on their willingness to do this. I think it would just not consider, I'd just explore.
Okay. Can we change the verb to explore? Yes. Working with FCC PTA on security teams. Okay. Teams.
Security issues.
Okay.
There are a number of PTOs, so I would suggest we include them.
They basically were asking to work in consultation with the safety and security personnel of the buildings. They said, we want to have a relationship with the safety and security personnel because we know where there are concerns and we'd like to be able to engage and work with them. So, and I agree.
Security team makes it confusing. What team are you talking about?
Yeah, if you could add with FCC PTA and PTOs.
I guess my question on this, is this school-wide, or are we asking for a district-wide initiative?
It seems to me that it sounds like a school-based security committee that would be part of the PTA structure or PTO structure.
Okay. I think we've wordsmithed this to death. So let's get a show of hands on this. Okay, there are enough hands. Okay, include more extensive requirements to control ID badges.
Mrs. Schultz, could you explain? I understand the issue as you explained it. I'm not sure I understand.
This is lanyards that have the school's name on them, and the teachers have their key pass that's on them. So if a teacher or a staff person either has lifted or loses a lanyard, it has the school's name, the teacher's or staff person's name, and the access into the building.
So the requirement is to report theft?
No, it's to explore eliminating as swag name-based lanyards for school-based personnel, so that you don't have all of the keys together in one place of finding the place, the ID, and the access.
Okay, I understand the issue. I think we probably, rather than include, because that has us saying we're going to do certain things, yes, I would say go back to and explore, so we,
Okay, can we get a show of hands on this one? Okay, good to go. Number 11, consider adding requests for security personnel, possibly armed, based on the size of school building.
I know how everybody's going to react. Take the possibly armed out. We'll have that conversation with the public. But we've got to talk about the size and the complexity of the building and the campus.
Secondary school.
Okay.
No, even West Potomac.
Okay, let's get a show of hands on that.
Well, I have a question. Would it make sense for us to get an analysis of that first? In other words, what would that mean if we changed? What would that mean?
I thought that was part of my threat assessment question.
Is it? But this is about the number of security based on size. I mean, I would like to see what that would mean.
As adding.
Okay, let's get a show of hands on this, please. Thanks. Okay, good to go. Review communications plan for parental notification and crisis with board when completed. Show of hands on that. Okay, good to go. Consider moving grade level scripts to be completed in short term. From being 2 to 3 years, right, Megan? Okay. Okay, show of hands. Okay. And then delineate staff roles more at each level more clearly on page 8. Is that correct, Megan?
It's for all of the definitions, but I think some include students doing some of the work too. So it's not delineate staff roles, just delineate roles at each of the levels. Yeah.
Okay. Tammy wants to ask something.
Oh, not a question.
Oh.
It's not just tabletop exercises. All of those on page 8 where it's talking about the different exercises. Just say for all exercises.
Okay, can we get a show of hands on this? Okay, good to go. Tammy has one next step.
I do as well.
Oh, wait, sorry, we have another page.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah, it's there now.
Okay, good.
I was going to say, where's mine on SRO?
Okay, number 15, make recommendation on adding SROs in elementary schools and include if other Virginia schools have SROs in elementary schools, include county in discussion. Okay, show of hands on that. Okay. Consider adding recommendation to fortify glass at building entrances and information if any other districts do this. So really, I'm looking for more information. I don't need to.
When you say fortify, do you mean the film or do you mean a different type of glass?
Well, I think because it's a question as to what we currently do at some schools. Because it went back in Sandy Hook era, we looked at this and some of our schools had something. So anyway, we need more information on this. It could be film, it could be something else. Tom, does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So can we just reword this to say explore instead of...
Tom, can I ask a new building? Is it something that's already done or something similar, comparable for new construction?
I think we're going to take that offline with Kevin Sneed.
Okay. Show of hands on this one. Okay. Next, 17, pursue state and federal funding for increased security measures. Show of hands. Okay. Send.
That also included grants, not just asking them for.
Okay. Just add funding and grants.
Yeah.
Okay. 18, send SRO MOU to the board. Okay.
That will come to the board when it's done.
Yeah, when it's done. When completed, just add.
I can send you the current one, though. Is that what you want right now? Like in the Brand briefing, I can send you the current one.
We have it. We have it.
We're in the process, though, of doing a new. I want to see the latest one.
Okay, 19.
When I'm finished, I will. I'll
provide more detail on the 18 mental health positions. All those in favor of that? Okay, and Tammy, you're set with this?
Yes, it was about the SROs.
Okay. Did you have anything?
Can we have a public hearing on the effects of this before we vote on this, or the outcropping?
I would refer that to the chair.
I'd like to see what people think about it.
Okay.
And trying to.
Okay. Well, let's get a sense of the board. A public hearing in the month of July.
Can I say something?
Yes, Karen.
I'm very concerned that we add this in the month of July when everybody is on travel. It doesn't look like a real public engagement with our community. If we are serious about getting increased input from our community, we should be holding this in September.
Then why are we going to vote on it?
Her point is we're voting.
You're going to vote on the outcome and never engage the public. I'm all about doing it twice, but I'm not about voting with never having done it at all. And we can say we're going to, after the next steps come in, we're going to come back to you again in the fall. But I think if we only offer 10 speaker slots before we vote on this, honestly, I think that's a failure on our part.
Madam Chair, my suggestion is that due to the importance of the topics that we are dealing with, that we do not limit the number of speakers to speak on the year-end budget to be 10. It could be number could be increased.
But I get a sense. I mean, we can schedule whatever anybody wants. We need to know what people want.
Okay, so
because
let's
there
get
has
a
to
show
be
of-
enough information going out to the, if you want a full public hearing, there would be another meeting. If people want that, that's fine.
Could we not do the public hearing just before we have the meeting on the,
I think
we've done
can
that
we?
before.
I think that's
where
a
we
good
have the
idea.
public meeting on
Okay.
the same night,
Sure.
but we have it ahead of time with unlimited speakers, and then we engage in our regular.
Can we see
Okay,
what people would like
yes,
to
so can we get a show of hands of doing this in July prior to the year-end budget vote on these issues?
The public hearing?
The public hearing or incorporating it into our current,
I need to know if you want a public hearing, because that's a separate meeting night. We can obviously schedule it if people want it.
No, we're saying it's a public hearing on the same night as our regular business meeting.
I'd like to
We've
know.
done that.
I would like to know either way what people want.
okay,
What is
so
your
let's,
pleasure?
let's first do holding a hearing on the same night as the vote on this.
Could I suggest that since, I mean, in respecting Mrs. Schur's thought on this, rather than holding the hearing on the night of adoption, if we could do that on the night of presenting as a new business.
Okay.
But I do not want to see this, since we don't want to have another meeting on the same night of meeting. Our regular meeting starts at 7 o'clock, and they probably have a closed meeting on that evening as well. If we could either start earlier for the public hearing or earlier for the closed meeting, I don't think I can support unlimited at this point. If it's unlimited, our meeting may not start until, who knows? Who knows? So, if we could set aside the maximum of, let's say that, an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, on the same night of the new business.
The night of new business is far better, yes.
So then that would be, 25 speakers?
And we could leave the logistics to the chairman and vice chairman, chairman's meeting.
And if there's I would say that if there is a massive, if there's 200 people who want to sign up and don't get the opportunity to sign up, we clearly have missed the mark.
We can
revisit
always
it.
revisit.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get a show of hands on what we have just discussed, which is holding a limited public hearing of 25 participants or less on the night of the proposal being brought to new business proposal being brought to the board. All those in favor of that? New business.
It's on the night of a board
It's a
meeting.
board meeting, yeah, board meeting.
It's 1 hour earlier.
I won't be here.
Okay, so well, we have enough hands to support this.
And I would also throw out there as a next step that we should consider another public hearing in the fall after some of the answers from staff come back on the next steps, so that we can expand the conversation with the public.
Can I offer a suggestion that recommendation 20 is not adding a public hearing on safety and security on July 12th, but rather the initial funding request for safety and security modifications on July 12th, with a commitment to have a full public hearing on safety and security in the fall.
Perfect.
I think that's a fair way to go.
Madam Chair, or Madam Clerk, were you able to get that?
She's doing it now, yeah.
Okay,
so we'll do a revote on this, but Tammy wants to speak first.
Well, yeah, I wanted to do a revote because I didn't see enough hands. And I just want to talk about, I am 100% in agreement that we need a public hearing on this. I am worried about limiting slots, and I am worried about the way we manage our time. I understand there's 2 points of view. Ms. McLaughlin, you're like, you don't want to come in another night, but at the same time, I feel like, what if like 50 people want to come and you can't do it all on one night? So I appreciate Karen's trying to hybrid here, compromise, but I'm not so certain that we we've never, in my opinion, as I was the public engagement chair, Megan, you are now, I don't think we've ever limited the slots to a public hearing, because that in itself seems an oxymoron, but that's. Well, I guess what I would like us to consider a separate public hearing in July, as much as we all need time off, but not have it in conjunction with a board meeting, because that limits our time.
Ms. Derenak-Kovacs, could you consider that this is our initial attempt, and that we put the sign-up out well ahead of time, and should it appear that we're exceeding the 25, then we give the latitude to the chair to contact us and say, we're going to have to move it to another night.
So I appreciate that.
Can I offer a suggestion on that, which is July 11th, have it as a possible hold for overflow. So when we put out the 12th, and if we get substantially more numbers, then we just add July 11th to that list, or to our schedule.
Mr.
Well,
McElveen?
I think we need to leave the specifics of how it's handled to chairs, to the chair's discretion.
Yes, there are a number of other possibilities if we find we want a public hearing before we vote on this. Looking at.
Well, first, why don't we do get a show of hands on the more expansive view that we should have a standalone public hearing as Ms.
In July.
As
That's I'd like to know.
as
'Cause
Ms.
there are other
Derenak-Kovacs
opportunities.
is advocating. So this would be on a separate night, a full public hearing in July.
Well, so Mr. McElveen, my feeling is that we probably, going back to Ms. Derenak-Kovacs' point, we probably should not limit the speakers to 25. So I guess my advocacy would be to have a public hearing tentatively on that night, July 12th, and get a sense of how many people sign up. And if it is, if it is just many, many, many more, then leave it to the chair to.
Can I suggest, if you want, I would love to know if you want a full public hearing.
Right.
The dates available in July so far are July 17th, 18th, 19th, July 24th, 25th. If you want a separate public hearing in July, I would recommend 17th, 18th, or 19th.
Yeah, I mean, you'll
That's
need to
before
make
the
that.
final
You'll
vote.
need to make that determination separately
I'd
in
love to know
chairs.
what
But
people
let's
want.
take the more expansive vote on doing a full public hearing on this on a separate night, other than a board meeting. So this is we're going to vote on this first. If this doesn't garner enough votes, then we vote on this on a full public hearing as you advocated, Ms. Derenak-Kovacs.
I guess I'm still. I'm a little frustrated because I thought that the compromise here is that we set it right now for 25. If there's more, then add another night. But why are we going to make ourselves come in and we might have 15 speakers, and now all of us and staff and whoever comes to record our meetings all have to come in because Ms. Derenak-Kovacs was afraid we'd have more than 20.
Well,
we don't know yet if we're going to have
Well, I
20.
think the chair has asked that we get the sense of the board on this.
Right,
So-
right, but what I'm saying is, why can't we get a sense of the board that everybody agrees? If more than 20 people express interest, we will have a backup night.
Why? I didn't.
Can I offer a suggestion, which instead of saying limit speakers to 25, say in item 20, if more than 25 speakers sign up, we will have a second date. Does that make sense?
Okay, Ms. Derenak-Kovacs is fine
I will
with
be
that.
fine
So
with that.
Let's vote on this one. Okay, so what we're voting on is adding a public hearing on the initial funding request for safety and security on the night of July 12th, which is when we're presenting the budget as new business. And if more than 25 sign up, we will add a second date with a commitment to holding a full public hearing in the fall after next steps are completed. All those in favor of that?
Oh, wait.
Oh,
Prior to the vote, right. That's the other thing.
And I wonder whether we need the last part, and if you're going to have, otherwise we're going to have 3 hearings.
We're going to have one after all next steps. Yeah, because there's far more stuff like
Can we vote on this separately then?
All we're voting on this one, all we're going to have a public hearing on in this one is this initial funding with a commitment that we're going to have a full safety and security of our schools public hearing once staff has completed the next steps.
You want to separate that?
Could they have a separate vote on that one? That's a separate item. Actually, we are just focusing on this one is a budget.
So just for number 21, just make that a full public hearing in the fall after next steps. Okay? So just take the text from 22 and delete July. Okay, so let's vote on 20. All those in favor of this plan as discussed? Okay. Okay, that's enough.
Mr. McElveen, I know I don't want to belabor on this one, but just to be sure, because I had to serve as a chair before, how difficult it is for a chair to schedule a meeting. So for the second date, could we have some consensus? Because I know the board members will be scheduling their
Wednesday the
events
11th. Wednesday the 11th.
Are we talking about scheduling a second meeting in July for
July?
If there's more than 25.
Okay, if there's more than 25, the options are, the problem to try to do it the day before, if you're going to do an overflow, I would recommend that we go into the next week.
Following it.
The following week. And the following week, you would have the opportunity for the 17th, 18th, or 19th. We do not have scheduled meetings those nights, and it is before the actual vote on and if you would let us deal with that, that may be the best. We can come back to you.
And if I could suggest that you get back
Yes.
to us sooner than later, so that
Because we could decide this at chairman's tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we're voting on number 21, which is to hold a full public hearing in the fall after the completion of next steps. Okay, all those in favor of this? 6, 7, okay. So that passes. Yes, sir.
So I hate to belabor any more discussion, but in order for us to provide information for the board for our vote with regard to the budget, it would be helpful for us to maybe prioritize not all of the next steps, but which next steps would it be helpful for you to have for that vote?
I will delegate that to the chair. I think.
No, I'm talking about the entirety of the list of next steps. There are some here where I heard the discussion where individuals said that I wouldn't be able to
Right.
vote unless I have more information.
I would ask that the chair prioritize them in the chairman's meeting. Okay? Okay.
And if you can't get to it, you can't get to it.
Okay, we are adjourned. We will return at 2:15 to discuss the calendar.
Good job.